Okay, I'd like to call the meeting together of the Joint Special School Building Committee. It's not an official meeting. We're doing review of three of the architect's proposal this evening. So we won't have the normal meeting format. We'll go right into the first presentation of D&W. So just as a sort of overview, this is, as you well know, our middle school project, looking at the structure of the middle schools in Nashua. The primary focus is on what does it cost and what sense does it make to renovate Elm Street versus building a new school. And if we were to renovate Elm Street, depending on how it's renovated, would determine what's done to the other two middle schools. But having said that, if you want us to introduce ourselves first, we can do that. We can start right over here.
I'm Susan Porter, a member of the Board of Education.
Hi, I'm Dottie Oden. I'm a member of the Board of Education.
Ray Garino, member of the Board of Education.
I'm Rick Dowd, and I'm the chairman of the Joint Special School Building Committee.
Hi, I'm Patricia Klee, and I'm one of the ward aldermen for Ward 3.
Carl DeBoer with Harvey Construction.
Sean Smith, School District Plan Ops.
I'm Dan Donovan, the Chief Operating Officer for the school district.
And as soon as the other three members sit down, they can introduce themselves.
We also have Mr. Mosher, who's joining us by telephone.
Aren't you glad we came in by advance? Oh.
Yep, William Moser right here.
I don't think you got a copy of this for potential questions.
All right.
And this you can use if
I'm Marianne Melisi-Golia. I'm a member of the Board of Aldermen and a former member of the Board of Ed.
give that to Mary Ann too.
Lori Wilshire, President, Board of Aldermen.
Heather, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Heather Raymond, Board of Education.
I forgot to also mention I am an alderman here in Nashua. Okay, we'll just let people get settled and then we'll jump right in. Just while everybody's getting their coats off and things, we have 5 architect proposals to go through. You're the first. And then the second group is tomorrow night. And then we'll be having another meeting as soon as I coordinate everybody's schedules to have a night to select who the architect is. So we'll be going over everything that was said and making a determination. The construction manager has been hired. It's Harvey Construction. You probably know Carl DeBoer. So,
Congratulations. Thank you.
And to us, congratulations.
okay. So, if you'd like to introduce yourselves and then get into your presentation.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lead us off. I'm Don Walter, principal with Dorn Whittier Architects. And first of all, we're just thrilled to have the opportunity to present to you tonight. So thank you very much for inviting us. We have set up a presentation which goes about an hour and a half long that we know we're going to do in half that time. We just have this habit of putting a lot of information out there, but we'll get through that because we try to be thorough. But tonight what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about us. We haven't had the opportunity to work in Nashua before. Talk a little bit about what we believe. Talk about some of our recent middle school experience that we think is appropriate, how we work, and at the end talk a little bit about what we think could be as it relates to Nashua's middle schools. So in terms of introducing us, as I said, I'm Don Walt. I'm a principal with the firm. I've actually been practicing for 33 years. Been with Dorn Whittier since 2000. So, and you know, the bulk of the work that we do is public education. And that's this team that you see here tonight, that is our focus. So we want to try and get that conveyed to you right from the get-go. So I'm going to let the rest of the team introduce themselves and then we'll get further into the presentation.
Hi, everyone. I am Mike Perlow. I am an educational planner with Dorn Whittier, and I'm actually new to the firm. I was a former middle school teacher for the past 16 years of my life. So it's exciting to join you guys tonight. Thank you.
I'm Jason Boone. I also started my professional career as a high school math teacher, and I serve as an educational facility planner with Dorn Whittier.
Thanks. I'm Lee Dorr with Dorr & Whittier. I am kind of second generation in the firm. My dad was one of the founders, so he roped me in and been with the firm for over 20 years now, and real excited to be here tonight.
My name is Roberto Fitzgerald, and I'm proud to say that I'm a Purple Panther, class of '87. I spent many of my younger days climbing trees and sledding down hills at Greeley Park. I played in the soccer city rec league down at Artillery Field and Kessler Farms. I had my first kiss at City Pool at Jeanette's Market. You know, I went to Charlotte Ave School. I went to Spring Street Junior High School and Nashua High, which is now Nashua High South. And, you know, I've got lots of great memories from Nashua, from, you know, working at the Hunt Community Home, washing dishes and waiting tables, to being in the youth group at Infant Jesus Parish. So my sister still lives here, and I feel a really strong connection to Nashua still. I've been with Dorn Whittier for, this was my 25th year, and if we're elected or selected to be your architect, I'll be your project manager.
Okay.
Too much information? Hasn't been kissed again since. So a little bit about Dorn Whittier. We're a firm of just over 50 design professionals. We've actually been in business for 26 years, so we've been doing this for a long time, and we do work throughout New England. We have offices in Burlington, Vermont, and Newburyport, Massachusetts. Newburyport office is actually just under an hour away, so we're local. We haven't had many opportunities to work in New Hampshire, but we've had a few, and we'd like to think that we can do more here, and that's why we applied for this project, also because of Rob and his really his desire to come back home and do some work here. The way we work is very collaborative. That means all of us within the office work together. We're not a bunch of little silos. We talk all the time. We meet all the time. All the information that we gather, we share with each other. And we work that way with you. We really believe that this isn't about us gathering information saying, here's what we think is for you, but we like to sit and listen and understand what your needs are and what your desires are, and we try to provide solutions that are going to meet your needs to fit within your community. In addition to Dorn Whittier, we're also supplemented by a team of consultants. And these are all very experienced consultants that we've worked on many, many projects. One in particular I want to point out is Garcia Galusca de Souza, who we've actually been working with as a firm for 18 years. So that's our MEP engineer. And for the last 10 years, we've been doing displacement ventilation in all of our schools with GGD. So excellent team of consultants. They just integrate seamlessly within our firm of architects. So in terms of experience, in the last 20 years, you can see we've done 42 schools, 4.1 million square feet, $1.5 billion worth of construction. But maybe what's most important is over those last 20 years, we've done 16 middle schools. And we've had a chance to really see how the middle school has evolved from 20 years ago to today. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with two schools that we're going to highlight. So this is a great age group to work within. And, you know, it's that in-between age between elementary and high school, and getting it right is just so important. So we have a lot of experience doing middle schools. And then lastly, you know, we like to see ourselves as a firm that's really entrenched with sustainability in providing green facilities. Now, you can see that we're a top 10 firm in terms of building design, top 100 firm, I got cut off, in green design firms. That's across the country because we're committed to sustainability. You can also see that we've got 11 projects that have LEED accreditation. But most importantly, while that's all really nice, it's really about designing energy efficient buildings that are healthy and that have natural daylight in all occupied spaces. So that's really part of our hallmark as a firm, regardless of the accolades on the right. So in terms of what we believe, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to start that off.
So, as Don mentioned, the middle school years are actually a really important, interesting set of years, and that's where I spent my entire professional life so far. So I'm excited to sit with this group of individuals who we all have various backgrounds. Jason and I started in education and the other guys in other areas, but at the core, no matter what our background is, in all of our perspectives, we try to understand it from a child's point of view, because we truly believe that education drives design. It's not a slogan, it's not a logo, it's not a campaign. It's a true tenet to what we do as designers, where we base many of our decisions. Because yes, at the end of the day, we're building buildings, but really it's the kids at the core, it's the school community, it's the faculty, it's the educational experience at the core. So understanding those elements, understanding the program, understanding the curriculum, understanding the needs of where the district is going, initiatives in New Hampshire. There's next generation learning initiatives out there right now that many districts around are utilizing. Once we understand that, then we can understand the environment and the facility needed to support that program. Here's a specific example of that. This is one middle school that was recently done by a firm in Shelburne, Vermont. And that school really was doing a push to, it was a very traditional layout of a school with double loaded corridors, and then it became more of a focus in project-based learning and STEM and STEAM and integrated arts and industrial arts. And so if we look at education driving design, we ask ourselves, what types of resources and tools, what type of spaces do those kids need? What type of spaces do those teachers teaching that curriculum need in order to support those efforts? And so giving kids the opportunity to create and to use their hands in a project-based environment is only supported by giving them the right environment. One thing worth noting is that, some kids are standing, some kids are sitting, some kids are more focused doing something with their hands, and the boy over in the cream-colored shirt is more of an observer. I think another thing that's important to mention in terms of education driving design is the fact that we know that, and especially I know, being in middle school, that every single community, every single student is different. Every single teacher is different. So really approaching this from an individualized approach of understanding what you need is very similar to what I would do in the classroom for students themselves. In terms of education driving design, another important tenet to something we believe is that facilities actually impact learning. There are studies out there recently done from the UK that state that 16% of student learning and the impact of their learning is actually influenced by the environment. That's why there are other researchers in the field of design and education that state that the learning environment itself can become a third teacher, that the student learns from a teacher, they learn from each other, but then they actually can learn from their environment. So this is another school that Jason will talk about in a few minutes in Situate, Massachusetts. But you see that there are aspects that are really important that we believe in. Some of those 16% impacts on elements like natural daylighting, voice and choice. You can see lots of variety of different spaces there. You can see students actively doing things. You could see them, you can see the colors are very muted. That really is supporting students, especially those with sensory issues. So looking at all these elements, but looking at all these elements with the understanding and the perspective that it's really the students that drove most of those decisions.
So when we say education drives design, what that means to me is that we're not going to come in with a cookie cutter approach. We bring a tremendous amount of experience to the table, but it's really important to us that we listen to you and understand what you're doing, and let our building resolution be driven by what's happening locally. How we're going to get there in our programming process starts with listening to an awful lot of people. So part of our programming process is intensive interview sessions with a wide variety of stakeholders across the board. I'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute. This is an image where we're having a principal workshop to understand, as Mike described, the curriculum, program, and services offerings before we ever do any design work at all. There's a series of tools that we think are foundational to successfully organizing a building according to the program. Some of this work you've done preliminarily as part of the Harriman work. The image on the left is a program of spaces statement, where we try to identify what the idealized list of spaces, sizes, and counts are in the facility. And then the second illustration that's foundational to our design work is an idealized spatial relationship diagram. And so in the work that we do, particularly in the programming phase, we let these two documents inform all of our options that we explore. If we're not achieving these things, we're not achieving the goal of education driving design. And then because we do this work, about 85% of our market, our business model is public K-12 schoolwork. We have a tried and true method for exploring options and then working with our districts to develop a set of criteria and evaluate options based on that criteria to make sound and as objective decisions as possible. So what you're seeing on the left is an example where we've got 4 different solutions illustrated. The one in the upper left-hand corner is an addition renovation scenario, and then 3 different flavors of new construction. So we established about 15 criteria, and then the image on the right is a consumer report style evaluation matrix, good, better, best on each of the criteria, including cost. And so at the end of the day, the district was able to make and communicate to the public the decisions that were made based on a set of specific criteria. And then the final thing I'll say about our programming phase, we know that the first phase of this project is just a feasibility study, but we want to assure you that programming doesn't stop at the end of the feasibility study. It's critically important that we meet with end users, in this case teachers, to talk about how individual spaces are functioning. So here we've got a physical model where we're asking teachers about how do you expect to use the space? Where do you want specific features to be? The last thing we want to have happen is a teacher or a student walk into a space and say, if they had only asked us, if they had only done it this way, right? So this part of the process, all the way through the design phase, we think is critical to achieving the goal of correctly organizing the program into a building and listening ultimately to the end users who are going to live and breathe in this building.
So we want to give you a couple examples of middle school projects we've recently completed. One's going to be a new building. The other's going to be a straight renovation. And the new building is the Gates Middle School down in Situate, Mass., which is actually near and dear to my heart. It's a 710 student 6 through 8 middle school. And what's interesting in the planning of this is that it was a 7-8 middle school model until we came in and went through all the visioning and programming with the district. They understood the value of the 3-grade middle school, and we were able to work through that with them and get to a point where we could actually build a new building and fit all those students within it. Just want to talk about a little bit on this screen here is that this is the front yard, and what we have out here in the foreground is actually a vernal pool. And we took advantage of that vernal pool and made it part of the learning and the curriculum. It's a tool within the school right now where in the spring, March through beginning of May, that's full of water. By August, it's bone dry. So the students get to see how the environment changes over those months, and then of course in the winter it's frozen solid. But we actually created outdoor classrooms that led out to that also, where there's gardening that takes place, there's amphitheaters and things of that nature. So I just wanted to point that out because we talk a lot about buildings and classrooms and what's inside. but we think equally as important is what happens around the building. And this was a great example of taking advantage of something that was offered to us, which was this wonderful vernal pool.
So we want to use this example to illustrate how we listened to some of the owners' desires and we think successfully organized the building around their program. This was a district who wanted to offer a fairly traditional middle school model in the sense that they wanted the 4 core academic teachers, math, English, science, social studies, and world languages together in a team, but they also wanted to take things like art and engineering, and instead of concentrating those in a department, to sprinkle those in as part of the teams also. Don mentioned that prior to executing this project, it was a 7 through 8 middle school. 6th grade was still at the elementary school levels. So they said, please organize the building in a way that we can do middle school grade level teams, but please protect our 6th graders. We want to ease them into the transition. So just to orient you, this lower half is new middle school that was constructed attached to an existing high school. The front door is here, there's administration and guidance. And so here you see, here's 1 team, 2 teams, 3 teams, and we did that intentionally to have the 6th grade be in this wing. So it exists on these 2 floors with a little bit of separation between itself and the other 2 grade level teams. We also organized the building, it's a 2-story building, so that they had the flexibility long-term to organize their teams either horizontally or vertically. This illustration is horizontal, but their teams are actually organized currently vertically. Because they wanted to shift their pedagogical model from a fairly traditional stand and deliver model to something more project-based, which is what Mike was discussing earlier, we had to think carefully about how each one of these grade level teams was expressed. So what you're seeing here is the core discipline science, right, and enough space for the other disciplines, special education distributed throughout, and there's an art space that's as part of this team. So what you're seeing in this illustration is that those core academic spaces surround what we call a media commons, a breakout space, so that students can work on project in an environment of their choosing. And so this is the illustration that Mike showed you before, one of those breakout spaces. We felt that for middle school, it was a good expression of social emotional learning to provide this wide variety of spaces that students could spill out into. So you see a lot of different activities happening here. Here's an enclosed quiet space. This is a noisy high space. Here's students filming a broadcast. And what you can just make out there in the background is what we might call a cave space, where an individual student who needs more privacy for some quiet reading might go, all of which is visible to teachers who are in adjacent spaces for passive supervision.
I think what's also important about that space is all the glass. So students can flow in and out of the classrooms and still be observed. The other thing I want to point out is if you look up, that's actually an opening to the 2nd level above, and then to not skylights, but glass monitors, or roof with vertical glass. So you're bringing natural light to what is the innermost part of the classroom wing in this case. So, you know, that's all natural lighting in there right now.
And then the last thing I'll comment on about this particular project as an example is the dining commons. The owner expressed a desire to deinstitutionalize the student dining experience. And so the way that manifested itself in this project was there are multiple zones for students to choose from where they eat. There's one sort of restaurant-style zone back here where the acoustics are much quieter. The furniture is booths and banquettes. There's a more conventional cafeteria experience here in the middle, but notice all of the tables and chairs are loose, right? It's not the attached table and chair strategy. So this client was progressive in the sense that they prioritize the student need over the custodial need. And then finally, this, what we call a Heller upstairs seat stair, where students are actually allowed to eat lunch on that. And you can maybe imagine the conversation that happened with the custodial staff as part of the decision-making process, and I'll just quickly tell that story. The custodians were against having this stair in the project at all. And they were certainly against having students eat there because it would be difficult to clean. And instead of just dismissing them out of hand or dismissing the stair out of hand, they said, what would we have to do to make it easy for you to clean? And one of the custodians in jest said, well, you'd have to buy us, leaf blowers to, blow debris down to the bottom of the stair. And by God, that's exactly what they did. So if you go in here in between lunches, you'll see a custodian with an electric leaf blower, and they simply blow the debris down to the bottom of the stairs, sweep it up, and they're all done.
So I'll take over here. So this is the Shelburne Community School. As you can see in the image over here, this was a full renovation. There was no additions done, and there were no portable classrooms added during construction. We managed to work with the client to move people around in phases to make this work. So these are the two middle school classroom wings here that were the primary renovation area. We also renovated their library. The image to the right is really what they wanted to aspire to. So as you can see, these classrooms are all just very linear with corridors down both on both ends of the on both sides of the wing, and really the way that they were set up educationally was in teams. And they so we put this bubble diagram together during one of these principals workshops, and they said, well, we want a place where we can meet with students have morning meetings. We want all 4 members of the classroom team to meet together. We want special education to be an integral part to those learning commons. We'd like to have a project space. So, as you can see in this is the existing classroom wing. Again, this is very just direct out to the hallway and then out. These were 3 walled classrooms, so they had significant issues with acoustics, security. You can imagine how difficult that might be in teaching in those types of spaces. And then this is the renovated classroom space. So we kind of tried to follow as closely as possible to that bubble diagram. So we have 4 classrooms grouped around a learning commons. You have 1 entrance into this team. And then you have a shared project space. This is your messy project area. They still have dedicated art rooms in another part of the school, but this allows the teachers on team, including their science teacher, to engage in various projects from making honey to baking bread, which they currently do, and sell that and raise money for other aspects of the school, like they bought a 3D printer, for example. And then these other small spaces on the outside here are special education offices and breakout spaces. So those special educators are on team. They are an integral part of that house, of each house. And the response that we've gotten back is phenomenal. They love it because of that fact that special educator is not in some isolated area. They are fully integrated into the team, and the students view them as an integral teacher. So this is an early 3D SketchUp model of those spaces that I was talking to you about. This is that project room, the learning, the 4 classrooms wrapped around. This is an entrance into one of the houses. Here you can see we're trying to create some identity while also creating security by closing it off easily to the rest of the class, to the rest of the school. In this learning commons space, you could put all 80 students from all 4 classrooms and have a morning meeting. They could have a chance for exhibition, for students to give an oral presentation on a project. And you can see in the background, these are glass overhead garage doors that can open up to spread out into that project space. And then there's glass overhead doors on the other side, so that there's a possibility for collaboration with the other house. So the idea here, again, similar to Situate, is lots of glass, lots of transparency, lots of flexibility in how teachers teach. You can also see that in the furniture and the variation of the furniture heights. All these tables adjust up and down, and they can also flip and nest. Each of the surfaces have marker board tops. This is the project space in action. Again, transparency, visibility, and they use this all the time, including set design that they were working on the other day. I'll let Lee take over on this.
Just want to talk to you a little bit about how we work as a firm and an office. And one of the things, and we know without having an opportunity to sit down with you, you probably know just enough to be really dangerous at this point. And we just wanted to talk a little bit about how we see this really critical phase of leading you and assisting you to making a decision is, do we renovate or do we build new? And so the process that we would propose to move through is really a two-pronged approach, where we're going to have part of our team working concurrently with Jason and Mike and working with your staff, working through the programming phase. We're also going to have another team out in the field looking at the existing 3 middle schools and doing some explorations on the new site. Those tracks come back together when we start to work on design options. And then we're not as dangerous anymore because we have a lot more information. And we're going to start working through development of options. And they're going to be a series of options looking at potentially renovation only, renovations and additions, up to new construction. And new construction can be looked at both of those sites. And it's one thing to be able to look at. We need to be able to work with Harvey hand in hand, working through this process, develop some accurate cost estimates, and provide enough level of detail that kind of guides us to be able to be understanding that we have pretty good numbers to be able to make educated decisions based on. Pick an option, and then we can kind of move through schematic design. What we do as a firm, we are, our platform that we use for design is BIM, Building Information Modeling. We use Revit software, so it's fully integrated. All our engineers are also on this. So we model the building three-dimensionally. We put all of the systems and components, so all the mechanical, electrical, plumbing work is integrated, so we can actually see in our model ahead of time where we have conflicts with steel and ducts, and that's what some of these images are showing us up right here, where piping is running into duct work. And we start making decisions of what's the most cost beneficial change. You know, do we get the electrical raceway to move, or do we move the plumbing drawing? So we share this model, and you can have lots of different output opportunities to share it with the CM. We'd also run this through Navisworks, and I'm not sure if Harvey's got that, I'm sure you do, to be able to kind of go through this process early on. And we can do this at each step of the cost estimating process. And I think it's very important that the whole team is on that. The other, went too far. Part of this educational planning thing, and Jason alluded to the fact that it starts early and it continues through the whole project. And we can never lose sight of our focus from student-centered design. And that sheet on the left side really is that summary of spaces that Jason talked about before. We tag all of those spaces into the three-dimensional model, so we can follow it through every design iteration to make sure that the square footage that we wanted to apply to art rooms, you get the square footage that we started with. And we have lots of ways to produce that output. And it's when you're pulling and tugging on a building, you know, trying to make things work, sometimes you can lose sight of that stuff. This keeps us all straight. The other thing that we think is critically important to a project and is often overlooked is furnishings and equipment. And we think it's so important, we've actually brought it in-house as one of our services. And we've integrated that with our building information modeling. So all of the furniture, you know, that we put is tagged into the model. So when we go out to publicly bid that stuff, we able to provide sheets saying, you know, these are the number of chairs and the basis of design. These are the rooms they went to. We can track that all the way back to following when deliveries come. It streamlines the process. It's much more efficient, and it's 100% improvement when we used to do this out of house with a consultant. Another piece of this is visualization, being able to communicate our design to you and to the public. So on the left is a rendered image, you know, that came out of our model. This is a project, a new elementary school in Needham, Massachusetts, and it's under construction right now. And you can see early on what it is that you're buying. We didn't talk a lot, and we didn't see a lot in the RFP about sustainability measures, and there's lots of different ways to attack it. We're not here interested in putting, you know, a LEED Gold plaque on your building if you're not interested in it. We, as part of our whole design process, we just look for low-hanging fruit that makes best design sense. And there's a lot of that out there that has no cost implications. We can certainly run through LEED checklists with you to be able to make decisions on energy conservation measures that make sense. And everything that we want to present to you, has to have a good return on investment. Sometimes, and in a lot of cases, we look at geothermal and you look at, what's that return on that investment? Sometimes it's long, sometimes it's not, sometimes it makes sense, and sometimes it's just a decision that's right. But we need to present those options to you. And our process is integrated. It's not just looking at it from one direction. It's we get the whole team involved early, and that's the best scenario to be able to implement this going through. You guys, I think, mentioned in your RFP that you're really interested in displacement ventilation. We were happy to hear that. And I think Don mentioned, for the last 10 years, this has been our primary mechanical system that we use. We've picked MEP engineers that are very good at this, and we've used GGD on most of those projects that we've done over the last 10 years. And it's just a much more better system. The image on the left, is a typical, more commercial overhead system where you're mixing the air from the ceiling, versus the displacement is where, the incoming air is coming down low. It finds warm bodies, rises up to the top, and goes out through the ceiling. It's a very efficient system, really great indoor air quality, and we're happy that it's something that you guys are interested in.
I'll just chime in there, Lee, that particular system, I know you're familiar with it, also has lots of educational benefits, because instead of supplying low volume, high velocity air that can be a noise disruption, this system supplies high volume, low velocity air, and you don't know that the system is on. So acoustically, for those students with sensory issues, this is a much better approach to mechanical systems.
And the added benefit to comfort is that it dehumidifies. So you take the moisture out of the air, and you'd be surprised that you feel like you're walking into an air-conditioned building, which this is not. So it's terrific in schools.
So part of that process in determining what's right, and we believe this is really important, and early on during our option development, is to do energy modeling on each of these scenarios. And the various options that we're going to come up with, you can renovate, the heck out of a building, but sometimes you're going to have issues with the thermal envelope on an older building. It's really hard to get that up to the same as a new construction. And so we need to weigh those things and be able to provide you with that information early on to help you, because it's not just the first cost, right? It's the ongoing costs that are really important. So the life cycle cost analysis, and this chart kind of represents, this is over the life of a 50-year building, right? 73% of your cost is really after the design and the construction team are gone, and you guys are living with these systems. So understanding the impacts and decision-making process that we do early on really translates, over the next 45 years, what the operational costs are going to be. So we really roll up our sleeves to work with you early to try and make good decisions early on and analyze all these systems. How does all of this integrated work result in, a good measure of our performance is architect, engineer initiated change orders. So here's, our last 9 projects that we've done. Our average AE initiated change order is under 1% at 0.89%. Some of it depends on the jobs. New construction, it's a little easier to keep a clean project. When we have renovation projects, there's a little bit more unknowns. We need to do a lot of work. The fact that you have a CM on board now is terrific to be able to go in and do some destructive testing on that existing school, know what's up above the ceilings and behind the walls, and eliminate some of those surprises as early as we can is really important. What we want to talk to you now is more of the exciting part of what could be. And again, we're dangerous right now because we haven't had the opportunity to sit down with you, but we want to share some ideas so you can get a flavor of how we work. We know we're looking at 3 middle school sites that are existing, and you've got the new site potential down in the southern edge of the city. What we know is these are the primary questions that need to get addressed, and you've done some work already in some of your previous studies to get some of these answered, but what is the general overall condition of the existing building? What's the ability of the building to support the desired educational program of the future? And it really needs to be designed, a facility is there to assist the teachers and the staff, and it shouldn't be a hindrance to it, which we assume it is right now. And is it possible to make these physical changes on the existing Elm Street site, keep school up and operational, keep it safe, and is it cost effective? These are all things that we need to answer in this first phase. What we know, we've visited each of the sites, or the schools, and we've looked at the new sites. We've read the reports that have been done by your structural engineers and Harriman on the educational study. We've been through the middle school, and it's a vintage building that we're quite familiar with. There's lots of issues in there. I think most of your classrooms are undersized. Overall, the building's got a lot more square footage than you need for that population. It's kind of sprawled out, and that's kind of natural when it happens with additions. There's lots of things that we would expect to see with code issues. You may be grandfathered now, but as soon as we start tinkering around in it, you got to bring the whole building up to code. Working in that site, there's certainly construction phasing. There's an impact on cost. There's an impact on education, and that needs to be analyzed. And one thing that we found interesting is, there is a little gem in that building, which is the Keefe Center for the Arts. And we recently saw that you, as a city project, have been looking at the potential of replacing or coming up with something for performing arts over the last couple of years. And right now, this is the primary, as we understand, venue within the city, but there's lots of shortcomings. And the reason I'm bringing that up is when we started looking at this, we had a project that we just finished in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And it's a similar story where it was a 1955 building. And these are these images up on the top. This is the existing building before we got started. And now we've finished the construction and it's new. That red box there is an existing auditorium. And it was the same thing. It was the home of the Pioneer Valley Symphony Orchestra. They had several troops that worked out of there. It was a community gem. It had 1,100 seats. If they were going to build a new school, they'd only get 300 seats. So early on in the process, we were at a city council meeting and the mayor came up to us and said, what do you think we can do to try and hang on to this? Because we're also contemplating, looking at buying a new site and building a new performing arts center. Is there a way we can make this project work, that it works for the school? We take care of the needs that we have, concession space, lobby space, a lot of the same things that I saw, that are issues with Keefe. And we were able to. So we saved that, and that box down on the bottom is that same auditorium. And we built right around it. We peeled everything else away except for that auditorium where we kept 1,100 seats. So this is just some quick pictures of it. The top left there is where we started peeling the building away from it. The bottom left is, the new construction, getting up to that. It was phased construction, and then we gutted out the interior. But we were able to keep all of the shell. This is what it looked like when we got started. This is what it looks like today. And it's still the home of all of those things. And the city decided we don't need to, because now this works for what we need from a performing arts center standpoint, and it works for the school space. So we're just throwing out an idea. There's a potential opportunity, and that goes back to my point of you can almost build a new school on the Elm Street site, but you save the auditorium, but everything else is new. And we're going to talk a little bit about that going through.
So when we first start looking at the site, you kind of say, well, how do we go about renovating and adding onto this building on this site? And as Lee pointed out, we looked at all the information and kind of came to the conclusion of, let's put together a concept here for discussion where we save the Keefe Center for the Arts and we build new around it. So this particular concept looks at adding a new academic wing. So we build new. The existing school continues to keep on going as it is. We put a new boiler room, new electrical, water service comes into that new wing. The next phase, we demo this section over here. You note that the cafeteria and kitchen are still ongoing, gym, existing boiler room, all of that stays intact. The next phase, We put a new face on the street level here on this side with some administrative type spaces. We built a new cafeteria. Meanwhile, the existing cafeteria and kitchen keep going. Built a new gym and arts area. So in this whole area, this is all the core, right? All the core spaces. So now we have an academic wing and the core spaces. We're preserving and renovating the Keep Center, creating an outdoor, or a lobby space, preserving that kind of historic feel for the arts. And then finally, in phase 4, after all the students have moved into the rest of the new spaces, we demolish the remaining portion of the existing building. And what this does is really opens up the rest of the site, because we've been able to consolidate each of consolidate the site with the new buildings. We've opened up and been able to add some nice green space and bring this back to the community. Create some parkland, some soccer fields. We have a bus drop-off loop just off of the street over here. We have another loop over here, and a parking parent drop-off loop with off-street parking located here. The staging area moves in various stages of the construction, but we have been able to work with the existing site to make something happen there. So this just kind of explores that particular option as one thing to consider. This is just a quick sketch that we put together. We love hand drawing and don't want to let that go in the new age of everything being 3D. So this is just what it could look like. And then, going back again, now we're looking at the new middle school site. Well, what can look like there? So here we've got about 20 acres. It sits in the middle of a residential neighborhood. One of the things that struck us by this location is that it's somewhat internal to the primary road out here. But there's a lot of benefits of now we're creating a new walkable neighborhood, but access and traffic are things that we would primarily be looking at. So when we zoom in a little bit closer, one of the things that we looked at from the information we gathered is that there are a couple potential wetland areas in the back here, and we wanted to keep any new construction far enough away from any of the residences. So we pulled that back away from the neighborhood, created some play fields, athletic fields out here, have a separate parent and bus drop-off area, some play areas directly around the building for recess and so forth. So again, just talking through access, we would encourage reviewing potential other ways to get onto the site. We have some thoughts on that, but just wanted to kind of explore this option with you to give you a feel for our initial pass. And then zooming in a little bit closer, this is just a little bit of an image to give you a feel, talking about those outdoor classrooms. This particular site opens up that sort of possibility of integrating nature and science right into the classroom. So under this scenario, we understand, there would be, you would want to reduce the overall population at each school, so it would go to 800 students at each school, each of the middle schools, meaning there would be some need to expand at the Fairgrounds Middle School and the Pennachuck Middle School. In this concept here, we've just added on some classrooms without really knowing very much about either of the two schools. We would need to investigate the capability of the core areas of each building to support that additional classroom space. But these are potential areas where we could see an addition going. We know that there's portable classrooms located right here, and it makes sense to add on another wing here. Again, like I said, we don't know what the core areas are in terms of square footage and if they're large enough to support an addition, but that would happen during the feasibility study. So in closing, getting back to teachers, there were two teachers in my life that had a big impact on me. You know, one of them was my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Genest. She happened to be pregnant at the time, and so you can see the publisher here. Publisher was Mrs. Genest and Son. But she, you know, introduced this idea of, you know, making a book of poems. And for me, it offered the first opportunity I had to kind of be a creative writer and do what I love doing, which was drawing. And so I still have this book, which I brought. I saved it because it was just made such a big impact on me. I teach my kids how to write poetry, and it was just like one of these things that just impacted me growing up. And the other teacher is Robin Peringer, who was my high school art teacher. I was her first year class when she came to the school district, and I think she's the head of the art department now. And she really worked closely with me in helping me put my portfolio together, helping me get into college. And we've continued our friendship, and I've gone back and helped her with our Empty Bowls project, and continue to be friends with her today. And, you know, what that says to me is that, you know, teachers are extremely important. And it goes back to our firm of stressing the importance of bringing teaching staff onto our firm, so that, you know, the idea of and the importance of teaching is brought throughout the entire length of our projects. It's not just, you know, many firms will have an educational planner which they'll bring in on board at the very beginning of the project, and then they disappear. Our philosophy is, as we are school architects, that the teaching aspect is an important piece that should be integrated and keep everybody on track through the entire project. So we appreciate, you know, your time tonight, and thank you very much for having us here. We are very excited and passionate to have the potential to work with you guys. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and we have a few minutes for questions. It's 7:53. We have someone else at 8. So if anyone on the board would like to ask a question, Alderman Wilshire. Oh.
I may not have done all my homework, and I'll admit that up front. I'm new on the committee. It's my first time being on the committee. So my question is the square footage of the first renovation. You said that building is too big for the 800 students, right? How much too big is it?
This is your existing Elm Street?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So right now, we think that that is fairly oversized from a gross square footage standpoint. I think it's around 200,000 square feet, and the New Hampshire regulations at 140 square feet per student, you know, put you somewhere in the neighborhood of about 140, 145,000 square feet. So while and the interesting aspect is, while you have a lot of gross square footage, your classrooms and educational spaces are all undersized, right? So the square footage is applied to areas where they don't need to be, which is unique. So that's part of the reason in that option we showed that you see so much more site potential there, is because it is a reduced footprint.
That's what
Okay.
I was wondering. Thank you.
I think Mr. Mosier wants to speak, but before he does that, one of the things I'm going to be interested in when we get this all wrapped up with an architect and the construction manager is, I'm not only interested in what the construction cost is, I want to know what the cost is over the next 10 years, or maybe 20 years. You mentioned life cycle cost. I was a logistics engineer for over 40 years, so for a high-tech firm, and it was very important to the government. Well, it's very important to this government, because if the costs are even relatively close, if the savings over the next 10, 20 years is very significant, that makes a big part of the decision process. Mr. Moshe, did you have a question?
Yes, I did.
And keep it as brief as possible, please.
I will. I'd like to know what provisions are being made for the teaching of science in the school, and not necessarily building an accelerator, but be able to demonstrate the principles.
I don't know if you guys have adopted the next generation science standards. Yes. But our typical approach to science, like all other spaces, is to first listen to the teachers and understand exactly what they're delivering so that we can shape science spaces around that. Obviously, there are New Hampshire guidelines for square footages, but our typical approach to middle school science is to both accommodate lecture and lab, and to do that in as flexible a way as possible. So in a strict science space, a life science, middle school life science space, for example, that might take the form of perimeter casework, access to water, and then having flexible tables so that they can function in a classroom setting when necessary, and they can be pushed up against this perimeter casework to serve in a lab setting if necessary. Obviously, there's a wide variety of solutions to science, but that's a typical one that we see for middle school. What may have a lot more variability is any STEAM or STEM initiatives that you might have, and we've executed those kinds of spaces also, but they tend to look very different than that sort of life science space. More rapid prototyping, fabrication equipment, more open floor space, more access to power, those kinds of things.
And again, I think it goes back to how we listen to the needs and the curriculum itself, because in one of the projects we're recently doing, they wanted two different types of science labs that Jason is talking about. One cleaner space that's production, and then one that's a little bit dirtier, a little bit more fabrication. And so those spaces both have flexibility, but those spaces have things in them that are really geared towards the creation or the experimentation of certain types of science standards. And the flexibility of, as the next generation, even past the ones that are currently in place, are developed, that those spaces are flexible enough to stand the next 50 years of a building.
And just lastly, we're constantly looking at how science and all curriculum is evolving, right? Just as we talked about in the beginning, how middle schools have evolved to where they are today. So we have a lot to offer to you and your staff with our own personal experiences and what we know is happening even beyond New Hampshire and New England. So it'll be a dialogue back and forth to ultimately decide what's best for you.
Mrs. Raymond?
Thank you. So I thought the completion of the Situate Middle School, it was just gorgeous. I love it. And I love all the glass. But as a parent of kids in the district who may end up in the middle school, or we might miss it, it depends on what we choose. But as a parent, I immediately got a ton of anxiety seeing all of that glass in today's climate where we have so many school shootings. So I guess my question is, have you evolved your design, or does that design accommodate the safety concerns that many of us have?
Don, can I start that?
Start? Sure.
Yeah. So safety and security is obviously paramount, and the approach to safety and security varies district to district. And there's a lot of misconception about what a safe school is. There's also a lot of differences of opinion about what a safe school is. But what I can tell you is that there's some academic research that's emerging that says the underlying root causes for these kinds of events can actually be exacerbated by not having learning on display. And so what we did in Situate, and what wasn't quite evident in the image that we showed you, is that actually each of those 4 academic spaces in the team have a different personality from a glass point of view. Only one of them we call extroverted, has an extensive amount of glass. The other 3 have less glass, all the way down to where one room only has a small side light. So we've done that from a safety and security point of view, but also from a flexibility and choice point of view. So teachers who aren't comfortable teaching in an environment where students have free flow of movement and visibility, they may choose to teach in the more introverted space. So we will certainly have a lot of robust discussions around safety and security, and we can evolve the design or shape the design in a way that makes it comfortable for you and your faculty, staff, and students.
And just a couple of nuts and bolts responses to your question in the school design is that where the main entrance is in administration, we actually have designed the building so that when lockdown occurs, the classroom wings are shut off from if someone were to get into the main part of the building. In addition to that, there are blinds available on all those windows. So part of their education is that if they're going to go into a mode of staying in the classroom as opposed to flight or fight, they can pull the blinds and they have areas to go within those classrooms also.
Okay, I'll allow for a couple more questions, but we have probably somebody out in the hallway.
Okay.
Mrs. Oden.
Thank you. I have a question. I noticed at the new school in the southern part, over by Cherrywood, there was a substantial amount of parking. What I noticed about the renovation at Elm Street, I saw very little parking, which is a problem now. They have quite a few staff members there, and parking is a problem. Do you have any ideas of how to solve a parking problem at Elm Street?
It's a great question, and these are all things that need to be weighed when we come up with some design options to be evaluated and which path makes sense. There are going to be certain compromises that need to be weighed. Certainly you don't have parking on site there now, and what we were showing was our attempt to improve that. When we actually get into more detail on that, we may find that we have enough ability to parking, but probably not, just given the acreage of that site. So it's going to help the problem that you have now, but it may not fully solve it, and we don't know fully until we explore that option further. And I think we had planned for around 280 parking spots on the new site, and it's certainly something that would have to be looked at is what is that right amount, and that between events versus daily use. So it's one of the things you're going to have to weigh. If we go this route, what problems do we solve, or what problems do we create, and also look at it from the new build standpoint.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm going to combine 4 questions. If you can briefly tell us how you're going to evaluate the renovation portions, although you're looking at a whole new structure actually and demolishing everything that's there. So I'm not sure there's that risk analysis on the building itself, but the one thing when we do a renovation and looking at a cost of renovation, like to know what the risk analysis is that goes along with that cost, the unknown unknowns, because those can really bite you as far as cost, and cost is a major concern. So when we get the cost estimate for the new school versus the renovation, we want to make sure it's all inclusive on the renovation, because we feel there's a lot of things that we might not know. And the other thing is, building a new school and demolishing the old school, to me, just seems very cost problematic versus a new school. So we'll need a good estimate there on what those costs are. Okay. And this is Mr. Jetty, that's also an alderman and on our committee, but also on another committee, and that's why he's late. So, but they're just finishing up.
Sure. Just to respond to your question, we showed one potential option where we're just saving the auditorium. I think there's a whole range of options that need to be explored. And as far as the risk assessment goes, again, it's great that you've got your CM sitting at the table with us, because those are the things that we need to be walking through hand in hand, because primarily they're going to be leading the estimating effort. And we have a whole book of skeletons in the closet of renovation projects, of things that you want to overturn early. So we're going to be wanting to do some of that destructive testing to go, look in cavity walls, is there vermiculite in there? What are the size members of structural systems? So we're going to be able to kind of fine tune our risk assessment. There's certainly going to be a contingency that we'd carry, and it's going to be a higher amount that we carry on a renovation project versus new construction. But as many of those rocks we can uncover now, kind of doing a site and building assessment on that building is really going to help mitigate some of those risks.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to that on the educational side. Two of the flavors that we would explore in renovation, one would be what would it cost to renovate the building without any educational improvements? And what would it cost to renovate the building and achieve as many of the educational improvements as possible? And what compromises would we have to live with if we did that? So there's a facility component to renovation and there's an educational component to those options that we would fully explore.
Speaking for myself, but if the cost is similar and we end up with a school that doesn't meet the educational requirements, I'm not interested in it myself. But
Good answer.
Good answer.
okay, so thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate it. It was a great presentation, and we'll be in touch very soon.
Terrific. Thank
Thank you very much.
We'll take about 5 minutes while the new team gets all set up, if anybody wants to. Mr. Mosier, are you back?
I am still here.
That's good. One of our members is online, so so it's basically 8:16. We'll give you a full hour because we have another one person coming in, and so what we'll have here is a middle school project, which commenced with the fact that Elm Street needs some serious work. So, so the question becomes, as part of this, is to renovate Elm Street if it can be done in a cost-effective manner and meet the educational requirements, versus a new school, which I'm sure you know where the location is. Fortunately, we already own the land, so that's not an issue. Yeah. And also to balance the 3 middle schools at about 800 students. Especially if we go with the new construction, that'll put a school down in the southern portion of the city. Pennachuck is in the northern section, and Fairgrounds is already sort of in the middle of the city. So with that, if I don't know if you've introduced yourselves to everybody. If you have, then you can go right into your presentation. Maybe, yes?
I was just going to say, for the sake of our staff who will be transcribing these, if you could just periodically state your name as you're responding to questions so they won't be like trying to figure out whose voices belongs to who. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you do your minutes verbatim or? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
One says yes, one says no. Okay.
Great, so thank you very much.
You make sure the green light's on in your microphone, and just so you know, this is being televised.
Well, thank you very much. We're glad to be here tonight as one of the finalists for this project. I'm Ingrid Nichols, president and owner of Vernal Architects.
I'm Brad Prescott. I'm project manager at Vernal. I'm Jeff Romeo, Fitzmeyer & Tachi, mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers. Matt Murley with Fitzmeyer & Tachi, the MEP engineer.
So as we go through the presentation, if you have questions as we go, we'd love to hear them. We'd love to have a back and forth, so please pipe up if you have a question to ask, and we do know you have some. Thank you. There we go. Obviously, this is Ingrid Nichols again. Our structural engineering firm is Foley Buell, who have done a lot of work in your district. Our MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineer, is Fitzmeyer Tachi, the 2 gentlemen here to my right. Our civil engineer is TF Moran. And we also have been working a lot with EEI, which is a performance contracting contractor who's working in your district. So just a brief synopsis of Banwell. We've been in business for over 52 years. Schools are our bread and butter. That's what we do. We've completed hundreds of different types of schools: new schools, renovations, additions, minor renovations, re-roofs, large projects, and 83% of our work is schools.
This is Jeff Romeo with Fitzmeyer. Like Banwell, Fitzmyer-Tachi's been around quite a while. And unlike some of the more traditional MEP firms that tend to be generalists that you know, are chasing projects more so than relationships, we are highly focused in the academic arena. What we truly care about is the comfort of the occupants. Everybody here is equally concerned with the students and the teachers who are going to be in these buildings. So that's what we bring to the table, and I think it's the mutual focus on K through 12 academics that creates such a nice bond between Banwell and Fitzmyer.
And the reason why we chose Fitzmyer is we are a well-oiled machine that are used to working together a lot. So it's just like a sister company, and we work together.
Thanks, Ingrid.
This is Brad Prescott, and as Ingrid mentioned, we do a lot of educational work. It's our passion. Middle schools is a very unique time for the educational process of a child and their development, and it presents its own unique challenges. And these are just a few of the schools that we've recently done that are middle schools. We've got Newmarket, a junior senior high school in the upper left. Richmond is the green building. Lebanon Middle School on the right-hand side. There's a more extensive description in the package that you received with our proposal. These are just some of the highlights.
So one of the things that we've been concentrating on the last few years is really changing the way architects have been designing schools and really trying to understand from the educational point of view how the teachers and staff and administration are teaching. I just attended the Ed Spaces conference in Tampa a few weeks ago and really saw some exciting new things that we like to share with prospective clients. And it really is about the child. It's not about the teacher necessarily. It's about mentoring the child, collaborating, doing project-based learning, STEAM, and it's really creating the architecture program that meshes with your educational specifications that really allows what they do to thrive and to learn and grow and be flexible for the next 20 to 50 years. So I'm not going to read down through all these things, but it's something that we really try to bring to the table that current faculty and teachers may not be thinking about. We also have done a lot of historic structures. For instance, the upper left, I have this pointer here. The upper left is the Stevens High School, which is on a main street. And then this is the before, and this is the after, where we added a new entry with a ramp on the inside, so that, similar to your existing school, their main entry was not ADA accessible, but we did an addition that was tasteful to a historic building. Concord High School, and then Newmarket. This was the existing entry, and then we've created a new entry with a porte cochere drop-off area.
So much of, this is Brad Prescott again for the translator. So much of our project approach is about preparation and being thorough at the beginning, truly vetting out all of the very rich information, some of which you've already developed with some of your facility studies and programmatic studies. And we want to take all that information plus doing very thorough surveying of the facility that you have, understanding your ed specs even in a more in-depth way than you've already been working with, really getting into a dialogue with your stakeholders and making sure that we've pulled all of those really important tidbits out as to how you want to educate your children in the coming decades in your new building or your renovated building. In pursuit of that, we put together quite an extensive program, which we're going to pass around an ed spec sample of that we did for, for Newmarket. This particular one happens to compare the programmatic needs and how that would be implemented, not only for a renovation project, but also for a new school for the same program. So I think you might find that enlightening as we go forward. And then it's all about, after communicating and pulling out the initial investigation, communicating with your stakeholders to make sure we're implementing truly what you're looking to have in your new school.
I think one thing that we found too that's very useful is to get the committee and go out and visit recently completed middle schools to see what others are doing, see what worked, see what hasn't, and get their lessons learned. One thing that I really make sure that we adhere to are two things, really: the project schedule and the project budget. So without those, meeting those two things, we do not have a project. So we're very diligent on working with the construction manager and the owner, it takes all three parties, to develop a comprehensive design schedule that works with the construction manager, so that we don't end up at the end and then not have a permit in hand that we need so we can't start. So there's many different pieces of this, but the other very important thing to note on the schedule is periodic community interaction. So charrettes and public forums and meeting with your neighbors. I mean, if the renovation is the renovation chosen, you're in a neighborhood. We need to have neighborhood meetings. But also really starting with your staff and the faculty and administration and the students. Involving the students in this process is paramount. That's how I knew I wanted to become an architect, because I was involved with a project like that. So the project approval process, again, to be successful, ongoing committee meetings. We like to meet every 2 weeks periodically, so the same day, the same time, so everyone has expectations. Getting a thorough analysis of existing conditions, especially again with a renovation. You don't want to have surprises, so we'd work with Harvey to really pick and prod to see how much asbestos and all the structural items, and if there are any site issues, geotechnical issues, all those pieces, so that we're assured to get all of those cost items. Quality budget estimates in the schedule we talked about. And quality graphic and marketing materials to get the word out, and attendance and support at any of the meetings that you need us at.
So this is Brad Prescott again, and this is what Ingrid was touching upon. And it's really about meeting people where they're at, communicating in the way that's most comfortable for them. So we were talking about charrettes with not only your committee and the community, but also helping you translate your progress and making it clear to the public through different channels, whether that be a website, a blog, newspaper articles, meeting with the community, not just during the workday, but on weekends and evenings. What really works to get the word out? We don't call this marketing, we call this outreach, because it's not about selling a product, it's about communicating with the stakeholders in the larger community to make sure that we're bringing forth the building that works best for everyone.
So doing so many schools, we've developed a project budget template for Harvey would be providing the construction cost for the building costs. Excuse me. But we also have owner soft costs that we need to account for and make sure you don't forget. So we have the total budget. These are some of the pictorial marketing pieces that we've done, and we've designed these for you to have at public meetings so that we have a historic kind of FAQ and facts of the project so the community can stay involved. And the other piece is that we are using Revit, and we are doing movies, fly-throughs, VR, virtual reality, and we found that a lot of clients did not understand 2D pictorial views. So to have these 3D fly-throughs and walkthroughs of the building allowed a lot more people to understand the space.
We found this to be a very useful vehicle, not only at the early design stages, but as we continue to go forward together through the building process. Even at the construction administration meetings, we're showing how these buildings are going together and what the appearance is as we select finishes together, and how we describe spaces and how you experience them as a child and as an adult on an everyday basis.
So now we're going to quickly go through 3 case studies of middle schools. One that looked at a reno new and that ended up going new, one that looked at reno new and ended up going reno, and then one that looked at both and did both, a new and a reno. So first, the Lebanon Middle School. So again, this process would be very similar to what we would be doing for your project. We looked at 2 different options of renovation, the existing buildings in the red, and 2 options of a new building on the existing site and a new building on a new site. We looked at all the different options. We looked at their advantages, disadvantages. We reviewed the ballpark cost of each option. And then we held a community forum because there were some very big political items that were important to the community, such as walkability to the school for the children. And they were closing 2 schools to build this new school. And they were also moving the 5th grade up. They had a 6, 7, and 8 middle school, and they were moving the 5th grade up, so it'd be 5 through 8. So there were some pretty big political challenges that we had to get over. You see this one, actually, renovation, new, and new. The new school on the new site gained them more items, but for a cheaper price in this project. The other difficulty with this politically was once you build the new school, what do you do with the existing schools? So this was the original high school for Lebanon, and then it became the junior high of Lebanon, similar to your school. And now that the kids have moved basically a mile up the street, this is now apartments, and there's a community gym in the basement, the old gym, and it's flourishing. Some other areas that we've visited in Portland, Oregon, there's a few renovated schools that have become mixed use. So they have housing, they have restaurants, they have breweries, they have museums. Things can go into these old buildings.
So in the town of Newmarket, New Hampshire, they were in a very similar situation that Nashua finds themselves in at this juncture, where you've had your facility study and a recommendation from your design professionals to date. Newmarket, when we joined their team and started working with them, had advice from a previous architect that renovating their existing school was just technically and financially unfeasible. And it would be cheaper to build a new high school, junior, senior high school. So at that juncture of joining them, we did an in-depth analysis looking at some of the challenges that were posed during the facilities analysis, specifically, and maybe the most daunting was the seismic requirements surrounding the renovation of an existing building. And what we found in dialoguing with the building department and inspector, the fire department and so forth, was that there were mechanisms to be able to renovate the school at a more affordable cost and satisfy the educational needs of the town without building the more expensive high school at an extra $10 million. And they're very pleased to have been breaking ground on this project, and it's under construction at this point. You see we went through several iterations of designs, as is appropriate for a project like this. The third version of our renovation projects on the left, and the second version of the new school layout is on the right-hand side. This is part of the compare and contrast analysis we did with a new school across the street from the new school across the street from the existing school, and we did a lot of looking at, well, if a new school goes here on this property that they already owned, what does that do for amenities, for advantages and disadvantages? If they kept the school and just renovated it and added on to it, what would that leave them for playing fields and parking across the street? We went through these different, I won't read through all of these, but there were a lot of different factors. Money was not the only consideration. What sort of facility was really going to serve them in the long run and give the proper adjacencies for them to function as a school and as a community? And we went through that for both the new school and the renovation. In the end, as I mentioned, there was a $10 million difference, and this had to be balanced against the quality of the space that they were going to be able to actually use for educating their children in the renovated space versus something that would be completely new and probably give something that was more generous, but were they going to be getting the best bang for the buck? Was that the best value for them?
Good question. The delta between, I'm sorry. I should know better. The delta between the renovation and the new, that includes site cost or no site? That's just building only?
That includes site. Yeah. And basically, their existing building had several benefits. The gym and the locker rooms were fairly new within 10 years, but they recently did about a $600,000 elevator life safety upgrade to the building, and they really didn't have a use. No one was stepping forward for a use of the building.
Did the existing building already meet the educational standards of the state?
No, we get that question a lot, and what we need to do is look at your ed specifications and look at what spaces we can utilize, say a classroom 750 square feet. If you don't need to fit that many kids in that classroom, for instance, a small group, you can make it a small group classroom, or alternatively, you can actually seek a variance from the state, which we get all the time.
Particularly in existing buildings, a lot of the school systems are leveling off in terms of enrollment, and we're also finding that the educational spaces they need is not really so much about quantity of students as in providing the breadth of curriculum that's really necessary for a modern curriculum.
As long as you have a answer and a reason that works for your program, the state is typically okay with that.
So this is a quick sort of visual illustration of the renovated school on the right-hand side versus the new school on the left-hand side. Slightly smaller school on the left for a new building because you have more efficiencies in circulation and so forth, and you're building it all at once versus the renovation, which has less efficiencies due to its age and its evolution. In Windham, we were asked to come in also after a previous facility assessment and help them come to a conclusion as to what would be a district-wide solution for pre-K through 8th grade. So we were looking at their two of their elementary schools as well as their middle school, and we helped them evaluate whether or not they should be doing a new middle school or a new elementary school or some version of renovating one or the other. The conclusion was to do a little bit of both. We did a little bit of everything. So the conclusion was to do essentially a new elementary school and renovate the existing middle school. But before coming to that conclusion, we really looked at what a new middle school, it was 6 through 8 for them, would be on a separate site. We started out with the modest renovation for the middle school option that they asked us to look at. You could see only the colored areas were the ones that actually got renovated. There were a lot of safety concerns and some added spaces needed to make it a true middle school curriculum, as well as more 21st century learning within STEM and project-based learning curriculum adjustments. And then we looked at a off-site fourth site for what's called the London Bridge School, which was 6 through 8, as I mentioned. And the analysis really came down to not so much the cost. The two scenarios cost the same. It came down to whether or not the operational costs for the district over the long term were really sustainable. What they found was they were going to be spending $1 million extra a year just to add another campus to their overall district and not really gaining a lot of quality in the education of their elementary school students through a very limited renovation, which was the building that was in the most dire need. So they found this to be a very useful dialogue and understanding that they've looked at every alternative. We're very pleased with it.
So any questions on the case studies before we move on? No? Okay. So we are experts in high-performance design. I've been lead since the 90s. I actually helped Ed Murdo at the state develop the Northeast CHIPS program. We were the first one that got the Northeast CHIPS for Merrimack Valley High School. This is a diagram of the CHIPS kind of classroom on what we go through. This, you know, with the 21st century learning environment and this, there's certain things that we take from both. Natural daylighting is huge for comfort of spaces. We've introduced solo tubes, which are kind of skylights in the middle that you can damper off at media centers and learning commons. Exterior sunshades, if you don't have air conditioning in your building, we've shaded the south part of the windows. We've incorporated green roofs. Daylighting at the gym to not use artificial lighting, and it's a much nicer light to play and do things in.
This is Matt with Fitzmyer Tachi. One of the critical success factors we think for this school will be to definitely do some energy model analysis. Throughout the beginning of the project, we're going to have a lot of decisions to make. I know we're going to be going with displacement ventilation, which as a mechanical engineer by trade is a great choice, and we're happy that's the decision to move forward with that. We can talk more about that later, but there will be other systems, say you're looking at a water-cooled chiller versus an air-cooled chiller, things like that, where we want to be able to plug that into an energy model, take a look at it, and see what sort of alternatives we could come up with to make the best decision for the project.
One of the things that, when we get to the costing of renovation versus a new school, we also want to look at the 10, 20-year cost, the life cycle cost.
Sure.
Particularly in this area of energy savings and other things.
Yep.
Because it makes a big difference.
Yep. Absolutely, we agree. And we have a couple tools later on that will help that process.
Excuse me, to what extent do you include solar, geothermal?
Sure, you can, absolutely. I mean, we could do things architecturally as well. If we're looking at different types of windows, we could switch out windows and take a look at that as well. So you could, I mean, the tools they have these days on the energy models are pretty limitless. You could input a lot of capable systems in there, for sure.
Yeah, we really, this is Jeff Romeo. We really view energy modeling as an inherent part of our early design process. For some of the reasons that you've already you've brought up, it's not just the first install cost that we need to be concerned with, and it also allows the mechanical team and the architectural team to really interact. We're not making envelope decisions separate from mechanical systems. So.
With the CHIPS program, the first one that we did in Merrimack Valley, because we did this integrated approach and did the modeling, we ended up saving them $1 million off the upfront cost because they downsized their equipment because they knew we were going to test our envelope and be assured the infiltration rate, so the engineer did not over conservatively build their system. So we saved $1 million.
And part of that discovery process at the beginning of the project is about discovering your priorities too. So we have a checklist that we go through as part of our early process to make sure we understand what kind of envelope standards you want to achieve, what kind of savings do you want to attain, and at what capital cost is your appetite to spend on that.
Matt Murley with Fitzmyer. Some relevant experience as it relates to your project that we think will be relevant for your project. Obviously, displacement ventilation, we have a wealth of experience with displacement. Obviously, you know the benefits, maintainability, efficiency, and first and foremost, occupancy, comfort, and health. We most recently did displacement ventilation at UNH's Hamsmith Hall, which is the picture on the lower right. There's other tools as well, occupancy sensor and daylighting we talked about, ventilation, dehumidification, and energy recovery are some of the systems we talked about we think would be arguably used at this project, and we'd have to evaluate each and every one of those. But on the displacement ventilation side, with our experience, obviously, first and foremost, being hand in hand, working with Banwell when you're doing those duct drops. This isn't a traditional HVAC system that you're sticking above a ceiling. It's got more life to that in that you're dropping it down low to the floor. It's discharging at different temperatures. It's got to have a different layout, a different flow out of the actual supply grills. So it's a specialized system, but it's the right system for a school. It is the right system. So going back on making decisions, so this is a real critical success factor for the project. Evaluating options and understanding alternatives that everyone can understand. So this is what we call an MEP Integration Matrix. Basically what this does is allow you to take a look at a couple different options. Say I go back to my example of an air-cooled chiller and water-cooled chiller. You're able to get initial upfront cost on this data sheet, operating cost, maintenance cost, life cycle, pros and cons. The purpose of this is to be able to present it to architects, engineers, and any other project stakeholder. You don't have to be an engineer to read this document. We try to put it in such a way to show that we're getting this data from whether it's energy models or a CM giving us a cost estimate. We're getting this data, it's objective data, and we're making decisions from this data, and we're able to present it to whether it's a town meeting or it's a design meeting with a contractor. This has been a successful tool for us in the past, and we think this will be a critical success factor on this project, is making informed, good decisions at the beginning of the process. And lighting and electrical, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but very important, making the right decisions for LED lighting, lighting controls and occupancy sensors. These are some of the design techniques we'll be looking at to implement.
So we have done dozens of projects with the EEI. They're the performance contracting that is currently in your district. Some of their goals mesh with ours. They want to improve the buildings, reduce your energy cost, ask and talk about renewable options such as solar and biomass and geothermal. They're conducting building analytics right now. So if we're looking at the renovated school versus new, I'm thinking that they really need to start doing analytics of your existing school. They want to reduce energy consumption, which we all do, and they guarantee their energy savings. Another project was the Stevens High School. They were one of the first projects after state aid went away that did it on their own vote. And they, again, started with a previous architect, but they hired us because we thought outside the box and came back with providing them with a project that met their needs. They didn't need a huge addition. They needed to renovate and rethink how they were educating. So one of the ways they helped reduce their bond vote cost was that they worked with a performance contractor, Johnson Controls in this instance, where they took basically $5 million off the total cost that the taxpayers would pay because they did a performance contracting contract. And we talked a lot about it because the contract is thick and there's a lot of fine print and a lot of coordination back and forth. And in this project, we ended up having them do the biomass boiler and everything inside the mechanical room. And then our mechanical engineers designed everything, the rooftop units and all the distribution and fresh air and everything that basically went and connected to JCIs. So it was a pretty clean cut. But that is an option that some districts are looking at to try to get the tax amount down that you may want to look at.
Excuse me, do you see biomass used much in inner city type school environments?
We do. It depends on the size of the school. It depends on wood chip versus pellet, because chip you need a larger area for chip bins. and, you know, the cost of the different fuels. We're seeing more hybrid systems now where you're doing both, so you can actually pick and choose. You don't have 100% propane or natural gas or 100% biomass, but you have 60-60, and depending upon the fuel price, you can go back and forth.
So whether it's a renovation...
Could I ask, on that issue, what about the emissions?
That's a great question. It comes up. You have to do state permitting, and you build a stack, and most of the, you think it's smoke that's coming out, is actually steam. So they end up with a 55-gallon drum of ash, and they can use that to fertilize your athletic fields because it's natural wood. And that's, depending upon your load, it can be every week or it can be once a month. So the regulations are pretty strict. They do, if it's in a certain realm, that you have to put what's called a scrubber on there to clean it before it goes out. But it's rigorously reviewed at the state level, and we typically have, in sensitive areas, we have neighborhood meetings to, talk about what the facts are, because there are a lot of misinformation out there about that issue.
So just on the general amount of carbon dioxide that's produced from biomass or gas or oil, of course solar doesn't have any, right? Mm-hmm. So how do those all compare? Do you know?
That's one thing that we as a team, I mean, I'm not a biomass expert, but we would have someone on board with our team that we could talk with you about. We've done we've done dozens of biomass. The state of Vermont used to give 90% state aid to do them, so they were, coming up everywhere. New Hampshire they are still giving RECs, renewable energy credits. So there are some really good grants out there to try to get them in, and I think it's something we should look at, definitely.
When looking at different types of green energy systems, what we find is that there is no one magic bullet. It's a combination of systems, depending on what your goals are. The best way to be green is to not use the energy. So we start with energy efficiency, and then we work our way toward production. Production is usually with our last threshold, as it were. And even then, we do look at the biomass, of course, but PV systems, solar hot water systems, et cetera, are all in the mix. They're all on the table, and we look at them together with our client to make sure that we're using whichever ones you prefer. Natural daylighting is another one we talk about. We've already talked about occupancy sensors, et cetera. But there's no one solution to that sort of a challenge.
One of the questions I have is, we have 18 schools in Nashua, and we have a lot of technical people that work on our energy systems. Is it a different skill set? Will we have to have different people to maintain that type of system?
A lot of districts, when they're not used to it, have that concern, and it's typically a very easy system, and once you learn about it, it's very easy to run. The biggest issue they have is the delivery system of the chips from either the hopper or the bunker, and there's different engineering ways to do that. So there's different companies that have patented their kind of chip delivery system, and some are better than others. But the up and running of the system, its connection to DDC, going back and forth between a hybrid system, it's, I guess the best way to do it is to visit some of the schools that have it, and there's several around.
Just as we talk about the early process of discovery and development of your program, visiting the local schools and middle schools that you're interested in emulating, or maybe even learning from, not what you want to emulate necessarily, it would be appropriate to also visit some of these biomass installations. There's several schools we can help you with and hook you up with to go visit with you, so you can see firsthand how they're managing through it and how it works or doesn't work for them.
I believe our closest one is probably Messinic over in Which they've gone to biomass.
And EEI and Banwell are involved with a project at Maplewood Nursing Home where we're doing a hybrid system biomass It's about 170,000 square foot building.
So on the topic of project phasing, whether it's the Elm Street School renovation, or we're looking at the Fairgrounds or Pennachuck under a new school scenario, phasing becomes very important in an open school reno, and it's something that really is figured out as a team. We work very closely with Harvey, if fortunate enough to be selected, and the district to make sure that we're not only designing the phasing, but designing the building in such a way that it makes it agreeable to phasing, which can be a translation into sometimes a faster production for the project and less disruptive to the students, as well as a cost savings. We brought a couple of examples today of some different approaches to phasing. These few slides happen to be of the Newmarket School, where we ended up starting out with adding facility storage across the street so we could have some flexibility to then go right into central plant renovation, to get the central plant online and get the site work done, get the building demolition online. Once the boiler was done and we could start working on, and the demolition was done, we could start working on our additions. It's a very complex project, as you can see, with multiple sub-phases, and the construction manager dialogue with the rest of the team was critical to making this a success. This is the Winton Golden Brook School project, and as a team we came up with what we all thought was a very exciting solution to reduce the amount of modulars that were needed during the renovation of this school, because we were basically taking down about 2/3 of the school and trying to run the school out of a very small area. And we designed the building so that it could have a phase one wing that was completely outside of the existing school. Presently, we're in the second phase of construction for this project. So the school is operating out of this new 2-story wing, just a few modulars, and the existing kindergarten and a cafeteria area. And it's been very successful. They're right now constructing this blue area while fully functioning a pre-K through second grade school out of the remainder.
Yeah, is the third grade still at the high school over at Wyndham?
I'm sorry.
No, they are not. That was part of the project in redistricting the whole district, was to bring the third grade and pre-K back to this elementary school.
They actually moved pre-K down to the Golden Brook School right at the conclusion of phase one. So the pre-K is out and down there. They're actually in the kindergarten wing presently. And the third grade moved over to the Central Street School.
Great, thank you.
One of the biggest political hurdles of that issue was that because of the other facilities that they had in their district, it made the most sense, and this site had the most area to expand, but that meant this is the largest elementary school in the state for 1,300 kids. So that was a big issue with parents and at this age group to have so many little kids in this big building.
I think it's safe to say that any educational environment, you want to, if it's a big school, you want to make it feel like a bunch of smaller schools or class houses. The idea of giving a sense of identity for different parts of the school, so kids don't feel lost in a large environment, that they're actually part of their community, wherever that is in the school. This is the Stevens High School up in Claremont, where it was an urban site, essentially, and there is no addition to the building as part of the project, so it was a very intricate phasing for the renovation. It's just a quick visual to give you an idea of how complex it can be, but also very successful.
And this project too, typically you have an addition that they start first, then you move into that and you domino around. This one had no additions other than the ADA entry off the historic front. So we actually had to do the summer slammer to get part of it done and then plan 9 different phases of renovation with the kids and everyone still there. So we looked at the proposed site plan and your proposed plan, and obviously did the site walk and had some thoughts and ideas to share and kind of talk with you about. One of the things that struck us when we were walking around, and the same thing happened at Newmarket, was the natural main entry that you feel as the main entry, we feel should be looked at. Shouldn't that be the main entry? How can we create that? So like Stevens, where they had stairs that went up, we concealed that and added a ramp, not a ADA lift, but a ramp. We ramped outside and used the grading outside as well as the ramp inside to minimize that. We've just felt, you know, at Newmarket, they had a entry kind of around the side in a corner, and it wasn't intuitive. So that's something we would like to look at. Security too. I mean, if you have different entries on all four sides, I mean, that's a security nightmare. We didn't know if the greens off the front of the building, is that a sacred cow, or could we turn some of that into parking and or maybe a bus loop? We did that at Stevens again, where we had a separate bus loop off the front and a parent drop-off. Do you have any special site features you want to keep? Have you looked at underground parking with a field above? I know this site lacks athletic fields, but why couldn't we sink the parking down and have a field on top? Athletic fields, you know that is an issue. And you have the interior courtyards, but not really sure if you truly utilize them for indoor-outdoor learning. But a lot of the current school designs are really embracing the exterior and natural part of sites, so to incorporate indoor-outdoor spaces. And have you thought of off-site or shared parking? I don't know if there's a spot around that you could share parking or have buses or, you know, for staff to park somewhere. I don't know, but it's something that could be asked, and we could, you know, ask the faculty.
So while you're looking at the present school, I'm under the, well, I think I know that this school was built in the 30s by the WPA, and that that the WPA built many of these same schools with the same footprint. Have you encountered any of those other schools? Do you have any experience with this type of school as you're looking at whether or not it makes any sense to renovate it?
I think what we would do is really join forces with Harvey and really poke holes in this structure. And we know that there is a structural issue with the floors and the gypcrete. We walked around with our structural engineer and know that the tectum decking and some of those issues and low floor-to-floor heights can be issues. But it's really about looking at your structure and not really assuming anything. We need to poke holes in walls. We need to look at you know, everything from the roofs. Are there certain things of this structure that are, you know, we need to keep? And we've heard and seen your auditorium is beautiful. The facade on this streetscape is absolutely gorgeous. You know, there's I would assume community loves this building, and you know, to have a public forum on what could this building become, you know, and talk it through. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, my question was whether you had experience with this model school before, and it sounds like no, you haven't.
Well, we have quite a bit of experience dealing with this era of school, and they're quite substantial as 1930s structures. There's a significant part of this school that's a 60s structure, which is a different animal, but it's hard to generalize on a later a vintage such as that, because they came in such a variety in the 60s. Generally speaking, the 30s versions of the schools are significant in terms of their massing, and they work for a lot of curriculums, but they can be difficult to adapt depending on the type of curriculum you want to put in it. So it's a dialogue between the curriculum and the building. It works for some districts, it doesn't for others. I know that's kind of a non-answer, but it really is particular to your school district.
So sort of the bottom line is going to be, is this building better used in another venue? And if we decide that we're going to build a new school, some other element of the city will take over what they do with that building. So it'll stop being an educational project and be some other type of project. My concern with renovating that building and leaving the current structure is because I've got a lot of experience with that building. My grandfather was on the president of the Board of Ed when they built that building, and I went to high school there. And not much has changed in that building other than the additions, some of which are okay and others which are not okay. So, you know, that's why I want to know, what are all the risks, the unknown unknowns, you know, before we make any decision on renovating or adding on or doing anything to Elm Street, and you know, versus building a new school which is going to meet all our educational requirements, and you know, if the relative costs are close, and you know, we want to balance the middle schools, you know, doesn't make a lot of sense to spend a lot of money on the school and still have educational shortfalls.
And the district, Nashua's done a great job of doing some of that digging to figure out what sort of educational requirements they already have and what sort of building they have. And we're very eager to dig deeper. When Ingrid says we want to put holes in the building, she's not being figurative. I mean, with Harvey's participation during school breaks, we want to do some what we call an invasive or destructive investigation. We want to dig some holes and let's find out what this building's actually made out of, and discover what challenges we might be facing and what opportunities we have. That's going to tell us the full story of what we're facing and how well this school is going to marry up with your educational needs.
I mean, our last elementary school renovation, which was nowhere near the vintage of this, we had a lot of surprises that cost several $1 million, and that, we don't want that. It's very difficult to go back to our board and say, hey, we need more money. So when we go after an amount of money, it's going to be a not to exceed.
And that's the way we're used to operating. And doing those investigations as early as possible helps us prepare for that.
So some of the thoughts on your proposed floor plan, again, going back to your educational needs, does this meet the 21st century learning program? The area that is circled in blue at the top is to be demolished and rebuilt, but it looked like the same functions are there. Have you looked at other alternatives other than that one? You know, it's almost in the same footprint too. So why are you demolishing it? Are there any sacred cows of the building? You know, is the atrium loved? Is the courtyard? Hazmat abatement, that goes to this gentleman's point of really picking up every single stone to make sure we have all the costs. And I know Harvey is very diligent and great about that, but hazmat is one that can be very small, or it could be several $100,000. So that's one to really jump on quickly. And another surprise, you know, that you need to really be diligent about understanding are structural issues. How are we going to solve those? We know you have some in the floors right now. So how are we going to proactively solve those if you're doing a renovation? And then the 91 edition kind of straddled some new spaces around the courtyard here. So this large courtyard here with this hallway, can we do a similar thing and add some more educational spaces that could be indoor, outdoor? It could be some for the new 21st century learning. Or can more of this building be more stories? Because you're so strapped for space on your site, it's better to build higher and have more site for your parking and fields. We always have to think about technology and how that changes and evolves and be flexible in our designs. And then the biggest thing with this is security, because you have the entries here, this main entry, this main entry, this entry. So really devising and looking at the overall campus to be as secure facility as possible.
Just on the hazmat portion, I was on the Joint School Building Committee, and we built these two high schools 14, 16 years ago, something like that. And we built this building from the ground up, and we sort of trying to duplicate it with a renovation over at the South School. In retrospect, if we had to do it over, we'd have knocked that building down completely and just built a new structure, because we ran into all kinds of hazardous abatement.
If I could ask, change orders that are put forward by the architect engineer, what kind of percentage do you have?
Less than 1%.
Okay. And do you incorporate the furnishings and as part of your design?
We do.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay,
Any
we
other
got about 5 more minutes if.
So this is our last slide, so if you have questions, we can entertain those and then hit this on the end or whatever.
Questions, anyone? Mr. Mosier, any questions?
I'm formulating some in my mind right now, but nothing that I can put forward at this particular instance.
Okay.
I am going over in my mind some of the things that they were talking about, everything from the biomass to the extending the building higher, and the parking situation, and the lack of of available space between the courtyards and the portables, and a lot of things going through my mind right now. But nothing I can, I want to waste time on just to try to nitpick on different things.
Okay, thank you. Another question I have, though, is having been involved in education for more years than I want to state publicly, education changes probably all too frequently. And one of the things we want to be sure of is the building isn't designed so it only meets one type of educational approach. It has to be flexible, no matter which way we go. And someday, hopefully, we'll nail education down a little closer, but it doesn't look like it anytime soon. So that will be part of an evaluation of a design. What's the flexibility if, somebody decides middle schools go a different way?
Yeah, and just to comment on that, most schools have that concern, and most designs today are building different size spaces and different types of spaces. A lot of schools, like this school that you have here, have open ceilings so that you can run new wires in the cable tray later on when the Cat 6 wire is no longer valid. But it's really understanding where education is today and what your needs are and meshing them, but remaining flexible. So you're right on.
And also the committee, I found an article on security and addressed security across the nation and how some schools are overspending and other schools are trying to figure out what to do. But security is a big concern of ours, no matter which way we go. And we've been spending quite a bit of money in many of our schools upgrading security and are continuing to do that. So that will be one very important point.
As architects, we're always reaching out, trying to understand the level of security that you as the district and the community really are trying to achieve, because there are all levels, and it can get really involved. And there's just a logic level that is a different gauge for each individual community. It's very personal, And we feel that we're very good listeners. It's very important to us that you get the school you want. It's your school, and it's your security measures that we want to satisfy.
We also are sure to meet with your local police department and fire departments throughout the project as well as after it's up and running.
We're very fortunate here that the police and fire and BPW, all of our services work very closely together in harmony.
Right.
And we hope that continues. But we have an outstanding police force, and they're highly qualified and rated. So
I think our window project is a good example of security coordination. We actually did at several intervals meetings with the police department and actually made adjustments through the project design right up close to the beginning of construction, because there were evolving attitudes about what the proper level of security was, not only at the perimeter, hardened perimeter of the school, but also after someone might enter. And the protocols had changed from the beginning of when we started the schematic design right up to bidding. So we were able to adapt as we went.
So we've sort of reached our wishing hour, because we should have someone else patrolling outside in the hallway. Thank you very much for coming in. Excellent presentation, and we'll be in touch soon. The process is that we're going to finish interviewing all the other architect companies, and then we'll have a separate meeting, and as a joint special, we'll decide on which architect we need to go with. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Again, let's take 5 minutes while the other company gets in and sets up. We'll give you an hour, so 9:30, it looks like 10:30 at this point. So if you would start, I don't know if you met everybody, so I think the first thing we'll do is we'll interview the people that are sitting up here, and then if you'll interview your team, you can get started. Why don't we start? What? Carl?
You can come back up.
Vacated my seat, figuring somebody wanted to sit down.
I'm Dan Donovan, the Chief Operating Officer for the school district.
Sean Smith, the Plan Ops Director.
Carl Dubois, Harvey Construction.
Hi, I'm Patricia Klee. I'm one of the aldermen of the Board of Aldermen here in Nashua.
By the way, you already selected Harvey as our construction manager. I'm Rick Dowd. I'm the chairman of the Joint Special School Building Committee and an alderman here in Nashua.
Ernie Jetty, Alderman.
Laurie Wilshire, Alderman.
Ray Garino, Board of Education.
Sorry. Heather Raymond, Board of Education.
We forgot Mr. Mosier.
Yep, Mr. Moses, Board of Education.
Dottie Oden, Board of Education.
Susan Porter, Board of Education.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. LaValle Brenzinger and our team are really proud to be back here again with Nashua. We greatly enjoyed the process of developing the high schools, and for me personally, developing the stadium, which is the project that I led. Next slide. Let's talk about the team that we presented here. My name is Chris Drobat. I am president of LaValle Brenzinger Architects. What's important for you is I'm the person who can confidently stand here today and say you will get all the resources that we have at our disposal to offer you to help ensure that this project is a success. What you have here before you is a tremendous group of individuals, and you're going to hear from them next and hear how they're going to help you achieve success with your project.
My name is Lance Whitehead. I'll be your principal in charge on this project, which means I'll be your primary point of contact. I'll be at every meeting from beginning to end of this project. I don't want to say you're going to get sick of me, but we will see a lot of each other.
Hi, I'm David Harris. I'm the project manager. I'll be focused on the cost and overall quality assurance, and I have 25 years of educational project experience.
My name is Lee Sherwood. My name is Lee Sherwood, and I'm a principal at LaValle Brenzinger as well. I have worked on many middle schools, and I bring that experience to this project because they're a little different than other kinds of schools. And I've been working on educational projects for over 30 years.
My name is Cristina Miller. I'm the interior designer on this project. My role will be to help develop the interior environment with you and also guide you through the selection of materials and finishes. I have 10 years of experience in the K-12 designing environments.
My name is Rich Roberts. I'm with Foley Buell Roberts and Associates out of Manchester. We've been doing schools with LaValle Brensinger since 1987, including Nashua North and the additions and renovation of Nashua South. We've also worked with the city on the Pennachuck reconstruction and the snow load study that was done system-wide for the school district.
And my name is Scott LeClaire. I'm a partner and a principal with Fitzmyer and Tachi Associates. We're mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection engineers. I've got about 20 years of living here in Nashua, which is great. I'm very excited to be here and be part of that. Our firm does a lot of work around Nashua as well. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Jim Petropoulos. I'm a civil engineer and president of Hayner Swanson, and we're land surveyors and civil engineers doing business here in Nashua, New Hampshire. Proud to say that of the 17 public schools here in Nashua, our company and myself have worked on 14 of them, including the 2 high schools. And I'm dating myself, but I go all the way back to the original design, site design of the Pennachuck Middle School. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
And good evening. My name is David Stephen. I'm with New Vista Design. I'm the educational planner that is part of the team, and I've worked with LaValle Brensinger on a number of projects over the last 6 years, very happily and successfully.
Great. So as you can see, there's a tremendous resource already here at your disposal. Honestly speaking, I can't imagine a better team. Added to that with Harvey Construction, our partnership goes back to 1989. We know the individuals you see here as though they are some of our closest friends, and they are. We know how to work well together. A key part of this is we are a local firm. We're 30 minutes away. Individuals drive by essentially through Nashua on their way to work each day. We employ Nashua residents. We bring a tremendous amount of educational expertise that you're going to hear about. Part of that, too, is we see this project as having 3 pillars. These pillars of community, value, and education were important back when we developed the high school project, and they're important still now. Community is all about this building in this project and how we're going to unify this part of the educational program in Nashua. The value, how we're going to spend the dollars. How do we make good decisions working closely with you? And last, education. This is about making incredible educational opportunities and spaces for students here in Nashua, and this team is going to help you get there.
So the first measure of success that we believe is going to be critical, and what we call a pillar to this project, is going to be community. And when we talk about community, we talk about a process that's going to engage the community, get the information that you need, as well as give you community support. The way we're going to do that is we're going to guide you through a process similar to the way we worked with you in the high school, which was reporting to this board for decision making, but going out and getting all the information that we need to keep this group informed and to keep the process moving in a good fashion. Working with all of the regular committees in town that are typical to Nashua, but beyond that, also making sure that we go out and engage the proper people to give us the information we need to do the best job possible. On some of our other projects, we found that if we really want to have a meaningful discussion about and build excitement in a community about what we're doing, then we've got to figure out how to do that. Here, you see us as part of an engagement session with students for a project we were working on. What we found is that if we can get kids excited about what's going to happen and what's going to be going on at their school, they can get their parents excited about what's going to happen, what's going to be going on, and we can kind of start really raising this community interest into what is happening and where these dollars are going and why we're doing what we're doing. Now, we did this with you before. When we did your high school years ago, one of the important community struggles was how do we take one culture that you had spent decades building and split it across 2 campuses? And how do we get community to support that effort? Ultimately, and be able to tell them, you're going to have an equal experience and you're going to have a phenomenal education, whether you're going to a brand new building or whether you're going to a renovated building. To this point, we went even further to say, by the way, we also have career and technical education programs that cannot be duplicated, and therefore each building is going to be a little bit different. They're going to have a little bit different programs, and we need to guarantee residents and engage them to say, we're designing equity across these, all the way down to where's the neutral ground for your athletics teams going to be, and how are we going to make that an equal experience. I think we did that very successfully there, and I think every resident that we have that works for us and all the residents we talk to say that both buildings offer a phenomenal education.
So when looking at the middle schools, our focus is again on equity. We realized from the very beginning that this is not a project that is about one school. It is the idea of the entire district and all of the middle schools, and we want you to know that that is our focus. There's a lot to look at. And so one of the things we did, Lance and I took a tour with 2 principals, one at Fairgrounds and one at Pennachuck. One of the principals had been there in the school system for 42 years. She was pretty amazing. And they were both very knowledgeable about their programs and very straightforward about what they thought could help. What we were trying to find was what was similar about them and what are the kind of things that might actually arise to bring equality or to bring balance to all the different schools, because we're going to need to understand that. So here's a drawing of the Fairgrounds Middle School, and it's really interesting because Fairgrounds is designed like a modern middle school. It has these wings with the common spaces inside, has like a central support area, and in many ways its structure is really good. And these schools are not in terrible shape, they just need some love, right? And both Fairgrounds and Pennachuck, the first thing that both the principals said was, we need integrated technology. And you can imagine that if we build a new school and the other schools do not have that they will be at a deficit, especially for the kind of teaching and learning that is going on now. The other thing about Fairgrounds was that the drop-off and the entry could be made more welcoming and safer. I think you all know these schools. Pennachuck was a very different place. It was a little more traditional, and so in order to make them feel like middle school wings, we may want to create some common spaces for the teams and things like that. You'll see that we're not just focusing on just the technical aspects, because we will do the technical aspects. We'll look at the materials, at the systems and all of that. But we put all of this through a filter of both how the community will use this and how they function educationally. I think you all also know that that Pennachuck could really use an auditorium stage kind of place. And you also know a lot about Elm Street. By the end of your interviews, you'll know more about Elm Street than you ever wanted to know. But I will say that there is the capability with Elm Street to really upgrade not just the systems, but really focus on some of the spaces. But some of the issues, as you know, are many of the classrooms are just too small, and how can we make them larger so they can be flexible? What are the connections? The whole backside of the building really, it never developed into a real entrance. It's where the service is. And probably the first thing we would do is move the service, because that makes sense. So we just want to, and we also know that many parts of the site may not be able to be fixed. Can you really get a field there? Probably not. You can get some safe green space. So this is the kind of stuff we'll be looking at, but in context of all this, we'll be looking at how all of these fit together and how we can have a programmatic equity for all of the families.
So value. As the project manager, my primary role will be maintaining value and quality control throughout the whole construction design and construction process. So when we talk about value, we're talking about looking at many different things and trying to balance all of those many considerations to achieve the best outcome. Value, as we know, is really more about, it's more than just cost, it's all the other important considerations that we'll look at. And one of the main questions for the Elm Street project is whether to pursue a renovation addition or a new construction path. So these are the kind of things that we'll look at when we start looking at pros and cons of both of those options. And just for example, phasing, a huge potential impact on cost and potentially impacting the educational delivery as well. So through our process, our value-driven process, we'll be able to get to a result at the end that's been well vetted, and we understand exactly how we got there. And with regards to sustainability, we believe strongly in what we call practical sustainability. That's things that really have a real-world impact, make a real-world difference. And as part of the design process, the whole team, at the beginning of the design, will look at all of the opportunities we have for site development, building development, and really understand and balance the upfront costs with the actual return on investment that some of those things can provide. And Scott will touch base on.
Yeah, continuing on with that concept of practical, when it gets into the infrastructure systems for the facilities that we're looking at, it's going to be very important to look at things in a total life cycle cost. I mean, you're going to be spending money up front, but you're also going to be operating these buildings for decades to come. There's going to be a lot of costs associated with just people operating them, energy, things like that. So we're going to take you down a process that's really going to help you figure out what is the best life cycle cost. We've got really good processes for mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, decision making, where we take you through all the options and we really find the right ones that are going to be the best for you long term, and really focus in on quality and value, and you know, look at systems in that light. Look at, when we talk about operating costs, not just day-to-day energy, but actually how much labor is it going to take for these systems to work, and how predictable is it going to be. You know, for schools and districts and communities, you need to know how, you got to be able to budget for it. So we're going to be able to help you with that and figure out what's it going to cost, not only today, but in the future, to actually operate those. And we'll help you and take you down that path.
Okay. And quality assurance is an essential part of our process. And just to touch on a few key components of our process, quality documents, obviously very important to avoid potential change orders during construction, to facilitate the construction process. And we get to those quality documents by working with our team, a shared BIM model that we're all using. And we share that model with our consultants, and also we could share it with the CM as well for constructability reviews. Cost control, again, it's an ongoing process. It doesn't just happen at certain intervals. It's a continuous process. And again, construction administration, where the vision begins to turn into reality. It's critical to maintain that same level of assurance and shepherding the design through construction, so that you actually get the building that everybody has worked so hard on to produce.
In quality interiors, you know, when we start designing that, it's much more than just the aesthetics of the space. It's really looking at the durability, the sustainability of all of the finishes that are in your floors, on your walls, and your ceilings. Because these finishes will be touched and impacted every single day by your students, and they're not exactly the most gentlest people on your spaces, as I'm sure you're very aware. So we want to make sure that we're giving you the best products possible. An effective tool that Lance and I have done on several schools is really creating a spreadsheet of several different options of flooring, for example, and we look at the warranties, we look at the maintenance over its lifetime, and really how that boils down to your cost. So what does that look like 10, 15, 20 years out, and when you can get the return on investment from those products. So at the end of the day, all of us are really confident in what's going into your building, and you're going to know how to maintain it long term. And another option is, you know, flexibility of your spaces, ever-changing technologies and things like that. I think with the furniture, looking at it, a service that we had offered on your original high schools was looking at your existing furniture, quantifying that, and then finding what was new. I think that's a very intensive process, but we can, you know, we'll happily provide that as well. And then, you know, getting back to aesthetics, we want to create an inspiring, engaging environment. So students are excited to come here, and that'll really play into, you know, being excited to learn. They want to know what's, you know, their next steps in their career, and they want to see what other students are doing. So the connectivity from space to space and really energizing as deeply into the building as possible. It's so important just to give an environment for students to feel safe and excited to come to, and some of your students, this may be the best environment that they come to, and you know, I think it shows a true investment in your future.
So that that process that David and Cristina and Scott outlined, where we have value integrated into all the decisions we make, has been very successful for us in the past. Over the past several years, despite a very volatile construction market, we have consistently delivered projects on or below the bid number or the budget number. Several of these projects have been with your construction manager, Harvey Construction. As we've noted, I think we've built more than 2 million square feet with them over the last several years, or the last 40 years. But we've been very successful in not only maintaining low and designing to a budget that meets the early expectations, but also in budgeting for what we're doing with them in a cohesive process where we actually share our model and accurately budget how much a building is going to bid for, accurately hit that number, and then minimize change orders throughout the entire construction project process.
So now that we've looked at community and we've looked at value a little bit, let's look at education and talk about that. In the end, that's why we're building a building, is for the education of your children. And see how we can help you make each of your students become lifelong learners in a new changing world. We've brought David Stephen with us, and we've worked with him many times. And I think we want to let you know how valuable we think that having an educational planner of his experience is to a process like this. Even though we're architects will say they know all about education, but it's really good to actually have an educator on board who you work with very well. So go ahead, David, tell them.
Okay. Well, I actually have a pretty unusual career path. I am a licensed architect. I worked for 5 years as an architect before leaving the field and becoming a teacher. And I spent the next 20 years, more or less, in the education field, working as a high school teacher, an assistant principal, and then a curriculum coordinator and developer. It was in that process that I had the opportunity to work with some forward-thinking schools and envision what is the relationship between really thinking outside of the box pedagogically and then translating that into architectural possibilities. So I really lead this process as an educator. I would say that the visioning process is one that is strategic, it's targeted, and it's highly customized. So we would really want to talk with your leadership about what makes most sense, who to engage as stakeholders in the conversation. There are different elements of focus areas. Most importantly, your educational vision and how we can help you create a vision or a building that will serve you now, but also grow with you over decades to come. So we look at design patterns and ways that those spaces can be connected and synergies between spaces. At the core of this conversation is what future-ready teaching and learning means to you, what you're doing on the ground, what your cutting edge is, and how you see yourself using this as an opportunity to grow. What's important in that discussion, of course, is how technology gets used in the building, how you differentiate education, and how you can create a flexible and adaptable environment that will really serve you in many different ways.
I've had the pleasure to have worked on a number of middle schools, and I can humbly say that when you work on a school or a number of these schools, you learn more from the teachers and the students and the building of them than you thought you would have known. And if I were to summarize what I've learned, it's that middle school is all about change. And it's because of the children are at a certain age. Middle school age children, and I have one at home, she's 12, and I'm sure she's up when she's supposed to be asleep. They're at an age that is kind of an awkward time where you're between childhood and adulthood, and there's a lot of emotional, social, and physical changes and growth going on. And I think that really defines why middle schools are different. And
Yes, middle schoolers are complicated beings. They want a lot of independence and they need a lot of guidance at the same time. And I think we also know that it's very important, especially at that age, for kids to feel a sense of belonging and to feel connected and a sense of ownership and engagement in what they're doing.
A word about safety, you know, we say a safe, welcoming environment. We actually have worked a number of times with DVS Security. They're a consultant who actually worked on the Sandy Hook school after, you know, the second rebuild of that. And what we share with them is this philosophy that you can make a building safe in this world, in this environment, but it can also still be open and comfortable. We actually don't want the kids to know that they're being monitored and safe, you know what I mean? We can do it in many different ways. And we can't wait to share those methods with you because it makes it for a much better environment.
And one of the ways that we can approach making school communities, giving kids more of a sense of belonging, is looking at how to cohort students and teachers in such a way that you create smaller learning communities. And we know that that's something that you use a teaming methodology in your middle school. Particularly with a larger school, this is going to be very important to find ways that each student finds their place within the school.
You can imagine having 700 or 800 kids, and the first thing you really want to do is break them down into academies or houses, and then even smaller components. And also, these communities are whole in that they're not just a few classrooms off to the side, but they might be infused with special education and breakout spaces and all the things that they can use all day long.
And the classroom is still the basic building block we're talking about here, but we want to think about making them as agile and flexible as possible. We really, as we're differentiating and meeting different students' needs, we're looking at center-based kind of activities where multiple things and multiple adults might be in the classroom at any given time.
So when we speak with your faculty, we almost can guarantee you that they're going to ask for flexible classrooms. And the reason why, first of all, they have to be big enough to be flexible and to be able to do things. In today's teaching environment, where you say you want to have special education inclusive in the classroom, or have individualized learning or off to the side, or have multiple configurations for discussion versus other teaching methods, it is just so important to be able to build that into that space.
And certainly STEM and STEAM are things that lots of districts are thinking about in terms of ways to engage students, to meet next-gen science standards, and to get kids sort of marrying head and hand so that they're putting into practice and learning sort of higher order thinking skills with the content that they're learning.
You're not just thinking about this, you're doing this. So when Lance and I visited your other middle schools, Pennachuck and Fairgrounds, they had wonderful STEAM programs, not STEM, but STEAM, very specifically. And we spoke with a couple of the teachers who were working on 3D, models and stuff. And you have great programs, and what you don't have is the integrated technology and the spaces to support those wonderful programs. And that's what we want to help you do. It's as simple as that.
Just one thing. Yes. We have some new members on the committee at least from the Aldermanic side. I'm assuming the Board of Ed knows these things, but when you come up with acronyms like STEM and STEAM, I know what they are, but could you just explain them for the others?
So STEM meant science, technology, engineering, and math. And it was this idea of grouping, you should probably talk to this. And then what happened was us creative folk said, what about art? Because really the truth is it's about making, it's about prototyping, it's about failing, it's about learning again. This is how we learn to work in today's world. Yesterday's world wasn't so different.
And I would add that to me the A in STEAM also stands for art and humanities, because humanities is a big part of the glue that holds a lot of this more problem-based approach together. And it's a very engaging and exciting way for kids to connect to authentic context within their community and solving problems that have meaning to them.
How was that? Was that good? All right.
So in terms of community, we know again that it's very important for kids to feel a sense of community. It's also important for a school to have a there, to have various hubs of activity where there's really a place where the community can come together. And we also want to be thinking about how the school can be used by the larger community, in what ways it can be accessed as a resource by the larger community.
We know how important it is when we speak about all the different schools and the different neighborhoods and all the different constituents in your city, that this building or these buildings are able to be used by everyone. Multi-generational, nights and weekends, all kinds of events. So we'll build that into this, and we'll try to make it so that certain parts of the building can be used while the academic section is closed off and things like that. So I think we get that, I hope. So we spoke about, now we've spoken about those three pillars that Chris talked about. We've spoken about community, and we've spoken about value, and we've spoken about education. But really the goal here is to take all those, so you get the idea that we're kind of holistic. You know, we like to look at everything, and we feel like that's probably the best approach. But we want to take all those things and integrate them into something that's the perfect project for you in the end. Designing a school or a middle school can be a complicated process. This is a diagram from another middle school that we worked on that shows all the little, all the little program spaces that we talk to everybody about. But each of them have a relationship and a connection and an adjacency and all of that. Our job is to make this complicated process simple for you. And we hope to do that. You can even see here how it's already started to cluster into places. If you look at it, the public stuff is up front and there's a central learning commons. Just keep that in mind as we move forward. Even in a place like the Elm Street School, underneath all this diagram is the Elm Street plan. And we might feel like when we walk in there, it's just a bunch of corridors and there's a courtyard here and there. But if we really do focus on renovating that beyond the systems and all of that, there probably are ways to organize it such that it can be a collaborative middle school place. Just the idea of putting, on the first floor, making a learning commons in the, in the center for collaboration, and then focusing on the teams and the wings so that they have more of a structure where they have, collaboration spaces. We wanted to show you a little bit about our capabilities and how we would work with you. This is actually the first floor plan of Elm Street. And what we did, past that diagram right there, is take one idea and say, what if we take the first level, the first floor, and create a real central common space where everybody can work. When you walk into, so now when you walk into the building, you're part of a greater whole and you know where you are and what's going on. We connect the front and the back and create a real lobby and a real entrance to the what you consider the back of the building, but really should be the safe, drop off and a place to be. And then really activate the courtyards for learning spaces and any other spaces for galleries and things like that. Even if you look at the wings where we've started to look at the idea of taking out a classroom and creating a common space and opening things up, this is the kind of things that if we do pursue a renovation, we will be thinking about and trying to show in 3 dimensions what it feels like, because we want you to understand what you're deciding on. Fair enough? But if we're doing a new project, we're pretty sure, and I don't know how sure you are, that we'd be using the Gagnon farm site. Luckily, we have Jim Petropoulos here, who actually is even looking at this site right now, I think, for the city, or has worked on it before. And so Jim and I took a little bit of time. He did most of the work, really understanding this site and looking at it, and I think he may have a few things to say about it.
Thank you, Lee. I'm sure many of the committee members know where the site is in the southwest part of Nashua, and it's actually a 20-acre site. The creation of this was rather interesting, as the southwest part of Nashua was being developed in the late 1990s and 2000s. There were actually two big subdivisions, Rosewood to the south and Maplewood to the north. And as these residential projects were being conceived, certain people in the city had a vision that someday we might need a school out there. And they had actually asked the developers at the time to set aside this 20-acre parcel, which we call the Gagnon Farm site. The site has good geometry to it. It is bordered by Medallion Court and Cherrywood. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that one of our colleagues tonight, Scott, I think actually lives right about here, Scott. Is that it? Right? So we created this lot, and we know an awful lot about this particular property. We know its utilities are in the streets. We know where its access is coming from. And Lee and I did have a little bit of fun in anticipation of this presentation tonight. And the next slide is kind of a combination of really what we came up with just for fun, just for talking points here tonight. Real quickly, you can see a two-story middle school really centered in on the property. You see how we have separated really a bus loop from the regular parent drop-off. We know buses and parents and students and teachers, we don't like the competition of access drives, so we've created some separation there and some stacking really for the buses. Front field parking, and really enough room here on the side for protection of buffer to the residences, protection of some of the natural features in the northeast corner of the wetlands to the north. And you know, really this effort kind of showed me that the site does have the ability to accommodate a middle school program, and I think that's a good starting point.
Another thing that we really looked at was when we write two-story middle school, obviously it could be three-story, it could be four-story, but I think one of the things we discovered pretty quickly is one-story, it really takes up so much of the land. It's not the most efficient land use, and when you do have a site where every acre is valuable, it might be good to build up a little bit for that efficiency. It's just something to think about. We haven't talked to you or your faculty or anyone else about what this middle school or these middle schools should imbibe, but how they should change or how they should grow. But here's an organization that's very simple, and we thought what we would do is give you an example of how we would look at a building, just like we looked at the site. And so imagine a middle school where the front spaces are the community spaces, so when you come in, you can go there on the weekends and you never have to go further and you can lock it up. This is where security can be so simple. And then maybe the houses, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, are built around those as their own places, creating courtyards for outdoor learning, and then a central learning commons. Many schools now are doing central learning commons that are that have like the food and library and STEAM, everything in the center. Think of it kind of like an indoor village. This is really a place where everybody collaborates and works. So we took it a step further, like we tested it, like we did with the site. And we said, well, what if we do a two-story middle school for you, just for this interview? This is not a design. And you can start to see how fairly simple it could be to create an environment that has these rich sorts of spaces for the kids. Each of the houses, have the team structure in them, and they're right next to each other, but they also have planning centers and breakout spaces and they have a gathering space. Most middle school places we go, they say, we don't have a place to put all of our team where they can meet. And then, you know, there's a central space where you could have presentations and galleries, and STEAM could be central and all of that. So you see the power of that. And then what we thought we would do is zoom in a little more. Remember, we showed those photos of those kinds of spaces. This is a, you know, this is a team space, this is that. We wanted you to know that we will work with you in 3 dimensions to really go in and look at these places so you can visualize and understand what kind of spaces. This is very practical. You know, this is so wonderful what we can do on computers now and to help you visualize. Lance?
I think, and as we're looking at each of these areas and understanding with staff and faculty how they're going to implement and they're going to work with students and how they're going to use these spaces, we can also be looking with you and some members of your community about some of the bigger areas and saying, how would this be used by the community? Is this a space that would serve well for a meeting that this neighborhood needs, or that an after-school group or a unified team needs? And then starting to understand with those community spaces, what's going to happen in each of those, and how can we best serve, you know, the greater community? What's missing, you know, in this neighborhood, and what's missing across Nashua? And beyond that, how does that play into our security plan? How do we secure it during the day? How do we secure it at night? And how do we feel confident that we've created a building that works really well as a school and really well as a community center, and all the while is a secure, great place to be?
This is actually a really efficient plan, and the reason why is because it has not that much perimeter, and that whole central space, if we bring some light down the middle and it shares, it really could be very efficient and cost-effective as well as being educationally significant. In the end, it's really our job to help you get to what we feel is a unified vision. So imagine, this is that same plan with that same school on it. So imagine a site where the cars and the buses are separated for safety, where there's plenty of parking and it's in the appropriate place and it's shaded, where we try to have enough road on the site to get all the traffic off your neighborhood streets, because that'll be a huge issue when we talk. We can even imagine a more circuitous route on site, because that's really the methodology for solving that. A place where the fields really work, where there's buffers. See the word buffer up there? That's a very important word. See the house, there's houses and there's buffers. We move the school away from the houses so they have plenty of land, you know, everything's smaller when you get far away. And the school is oriented to the south, by the way, so it has the right orientation to take in the right sunlight and be energy efficient. If we can work with you and this is just an example, and come up with a unified vision, I feel like it would, you know, we'd all have done our jobs for the whole community.
So I think what we've really tried to say tonight is that we believe that this building this project has a lot of opportunities to be really successful and have a profound impact, not just to the kids, but to your greater community. From the community side of things, we believe that the project has to have community support. It has to benefit from community input, and it has to benefit from as many different people who have to come to this table to inform the design so that you can move this forward and say, this is a great community asset.
And of course, it has to maintain the value that will develop throughout and really maximize the resources of the community to maximize your return on investment.
And in the end, this is all about your children's future. We recognize that you have 3 middle schools, and this is a larger project. This is not simply a renovation of a couple of buildings. This is really a large project, and we're used to doing large, complex projects from that, you know, from the community level through value all the way to education. And we recognize that this is about equity, and together we would like to achieve excellence with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions for? None? Mr. Moreno.
I like your design for the Gagnon farm, but how would you accommodate bicycles, people bicycling to
that
site?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful question, because one of the things we didn't say, so you can imagine that one part of safety is making sure that there are ways to get on the site and you never cross traffic. So you see that kind of pathway on the side. We even started to show right here, you know, the idea that bicyclists and walkers are very important. And we would have, nowadays you have bicycle racks, like a 5 bazillion of them. It really depends on how many people are within the radius and how many people we want to attract. And of course, there has to be some coming together with the city and to see if there are safe paths and sidewalks for the children to get to the school. So that's something we would collaborate with you about.
One of the things that we talked about was looking at another egress from the new school property to sort of alleviate the concern of the neighborhood. So I'm not going to say where that is, but
Sure.
We can show you where that is.
No, I don't.
We did work a little bit with Jim on that, and I think
go
he's
ahead.
already got some ideas.
We actually erased it from this graphic. So it's an interesting dynamic being within a recently constructed subdivision. And so much like access, you know, those are some of the things we're going to have to think about. How do we get people in and out? We do know there's undeveloped land to the north. We do know there's undeveloped land to the west. And I think working with the committee, we would want to explore access with the committee, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think one thing I've learned from Jim and agree with him is that access, traffic, and neighborhood relations are probably the greatest issue with the site and getting on the site. The site, once you get on the site, I think we're in pretty good shape.
And as a team, we want to address a traffic study so that when the questions come up, and they will, we have an answer as to traffic flow and volume and times and all that.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about community engagement plan. One of the things that we would want to do early with you is kind of create a full list of all the people that need to be engaged as part of this project to ensure that we get it done right. We very often do that is go down through who are we engaging, how are we engaging them, who is best to engage them, and what are we hoping to get out of that engagement. Things like traffic analysis, I think this community, this neighborhood, this development is going to be a group that we want to engage and say, we've thought about this and here's our solution. Much different process than when we engage students, obviously in a much different format to engage.
Right.
If I may, Lee, I can recall for this school project, because of the residences, I think to the north, Cheyenne and that whole area, we had abutter meetings.
And west.
And yeah, and west, right. And so I would certainly see a neighborhood meeting in advance, well in advance, to keep people informed and talk about, identify the challenges, and then here's how we're going to solve those challenges. Sure.
So
Hello?
Marion? Mr. Mosher, did you have something?
Yeah, I had a couple of things in my mind there, and this is a quickie. Main Dunstable Road, which is Route 130, actually. We have a problem on this highway. Once you get out to where it's less developed, you will find that you have a problem with people that like to go a little bit over the speed limit. I'd say by about 15 or 20 miles over the speed limit. And also, just throw this out, is that I heard it mentioned that the south-facing main part of the building, that would open it up to some solar assist, wouldn't it, for the electrical apparatus?
I don't know too much about the first one, people driving fast, but I'm sure that's happening. But I love to talk about orienting buildings and natural light and electrical costs. Basically, yes? Go ahead, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the solar component here. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities with solar. And we've had quite a bit of experience working with municipalities and schools and things like that to really take advantage of some of the opportunities with solar, particularly with things like purchase agreements and ways for you to get solar implemented but not have to lay down all the capital costs nor the maintenance side of it. So I think that's a real interesting potential opportunity that we can help you with, and we've helped a lot of schools and communities in the past with that. So that's an excellent idea.
Scott and I recently did an elementary school in Rochester that actually funded a full solar purchase agreement, and they were so happy with it, they actually went through all of their schools after that weren't being renovated and signed power purchase agreements and did solar on those. It's been a real success for them to stabilize their energy costs, reduce them in some areas, and also, lead by example, do the right thing.
To what extent have you looked at biomass, geothermal, other energy sources?
Sure, we've looked at both, and one of the things that we really pride ourselves in is we're going to bring all of those options to the table for you, and develop them in a matrix of ways of looking at them with their pros, cons, and life cycle costs, and flexibility and maintainability. We'll bring all of those to the table with you. We have a significant amount of experience with geothermal and biomass, both in the sort of higher ed side of the house and in the K through 12 areas. I see all of those as actually being viable opportunities, but the key is going to be, working with us to kind of look and working together to figure out the sort of life cycle cost that's associated with each of them. We clearly understand, there are not sort of large crews of maintenance folks that are going to take care of these schools. So we want to make sure we end up with something that is robust and reliable as well. So balancing that out, and it may be even a hybrid solution. So that's real common nowadays with, partial geothermal and then, parts of it being more traditional. So we'll bring all of that to the table for you and help you through those decisions.
For those of you who are sustainably minded, it is not an unreasonable goal to think about net zero energy. Net zero energy basically means that over time, we can make a net zero energy ready building so that over time you can add on renewable resources. This is not far-fetched anymore. The idea that you could have a school in a few years that could pay for its own energy, over time, paying to the grid and back, could pay for itself energy-wise, not far-fetched at all.
Sean, one comment. Kearsarge Middle School has a wood chip boiler plant that was part of that, and as far as I know, they continue to use that successfully. Also, we're working for Bowdoin College right now with designing super insulated buildings that are they're going back to electric resistance heat because of the savings they're seeing. So it's upfronting the energy, the investment in the building envelope, super insulating it, and trading off that initial cost. So there's different strategies here, and we've had success multiple ways, and we're going to find the one that works right, the one that fits the budget, meets requirements, and performs the way you're looking.
So one of the things, whoever's selected as the architect, I'm sure is going to get together with Carl with a hammer and start looking at behind the walls at Elm Street. My biggest concern is I'm concerned about the risk of getting under the floors and behind the walls and trying to change structural integrity of Elm Street because of the way it was built and when it was built and how long it's been standing there. And when we have an estimate of something at Elm Street, we want all those risk costs out because, as you well know, when we started doing the South School, we ran into some things that we didn't expect. And I certainly don't want that again.
Absolutely. One of the things that we have in our process is a significant due diligence phase. And although we say it over and over again, it rings true. You can spend a lot of time on due diligence and it's always worth it. We just completed with Harvey Construction renovation and additions and demolition in 364,000 square feet at Salem High School across 9 phases. For proper due diligence, we came across some areas of the building that had to be taken down. We came across some areas of the building that were in great shape for renovation, and we came across some areas of the building that were tough decisions to make on which way it leaned. I agree that early on, if that due diligence is done properly, assessing the costs and the risk factors for each of those is paramount. And that's why we've got our full team of structural engineer all the way down through to designers to say we need to get through those buildings and have a really good understanding before we start saying this is a solution that's going to work.
A new technology that we're using now is we're laser scanning the buildings inside and out, including above the ceilings, below the floors where we can access them, and it's providing tremendous amount of data and information that is otherwise inconceivably attainable otherwise, unless you're a very you have cameras or some other very intensive process of trying to get to that. So imagine having a school you need to occupy, but somehow you need to take down all the ceilings so you can see what's going on. It's a difficult exercise. So this has been incredible for us, and that's an opportunity that's a service. And in fact, it actually saves us time. It saves us time up front for doing it, but more importantly, it saves us time if we all have to come back to the table and say, okay, now what do we do? You know, which costs money and costs everyone time. So we'd rather not do it then. Let's do it up front and figure it out first time.
Yeah, very early in the project, we start leveraging our 3D modeling software. We have the ability to phase that work, and so that we understand how this building, not just what it's going to be in the end result, but how it's going to go together. We've worked with Harvey before and shared our models even during the estimating phase, so they can point out problems that we as engineers and architects see as a great solution and those guys see as a challenge to implement, to put it nicely.
I hope that Carl has had good experiences working with us, and yes, no.
No, absolutely, and I was actually going to raise the whole building scan technology that you guys have gone to. It produces a wealth of information. It helps tremendously, especially when you're dealing with a building that goes back to the 30s, that's got plaster ceilings above the acoustical ceilings, and trying to see what you can find is extremely difficult. So thanks for bringing it up.
Excuse me. That scanning with the laser, that's LiDAR, and they use that in Asia to map out a cavern that was so huge that you could fit so many Statues of Liberty in it. And that was carved out by water over the centuries. They used the LiDAR or laser scanning to get a picture of the inside. And I was going to recommend it to some other people about that in Elm Street to get a good picture of what the interior really was like and what would have to be done.
All this discussion is a good segue to my question. As a firm for school projects, what percentage are the change orders related to E&E?
Sure. Many of our recent projects on new construction, we've been at around the 1% range, well below industry standard. I believe we're closing out our most recent project that's just closed out is Salem High School. We're at around 2% for errors and omissions. And we're really proud of that number. Again, about half of what the industry standard is, and a lot of that is based on the value-driven process that we outlined and making sure that everything is well coordinated in the quality assurance that David brings to the table.
Of course, change orders are higher when you have an existing building with unforeseen conditions. So when you hear somebody say 1% for new and then 2% for renovation, that makes, for everybody else, I know you know that, that's a pretty big deal.
I hate to go back to our earlier conversation about parking, but Lee, you may understand this as the parent of a middle schooler. we tend to plan for cars and buses, and I think, and we've experienced this in some of our other schools, we assume because we have enough students in the school to ride in on 10 buses, they're coming in on 10 buses. And in reality, what we often hear from people is, why are there 10 buses going into that school and there's probably only 5 buses worth of kids going in? It's because we've got 5 more buses worth of parents dropping off.
Right.
And in our more residential neighborhoods, we've found in the city it causes quite a problem. So I just think that in looking at the residential neighborhood around this location and contemplating getting traffic in and out of there, you know, kids want to sleep later and parents say, sure, instead of catching the bus at 6:45 and school starts at 7:30, I'll take you at 7:15. And it makes life easier for everyone. And I think all of us who are parents or who have been middle schoolers understand that. But I think that it's something we seriously need to think about. And even the walkers, if it's snowing and it's raining, parents are going to drive them. So I think looking at the nature of this neighborhood, if we end up building new, we need to seriously think about access to that school and car traffic that may actually be greater than bus traffic or competing with it.
Everything you've said has been right on and been our experience. The difference between a rainy day and a normal day is dramatic. And a lot of times what people do, and the traffic consultant will suggest, is on a regular day, you know, we have a queuing line and it wants to be, say, 400 feet long, and that's what he calculated. But then on a rainy day, maybe we take everyone around the parking lot and all, like, you know, and we lengthen that. We come up with strategies on site to deal with those different contingencies, because what you said is right. And then the difference between in the morning, when everybody kind of shows up at a certain time, and in the afternoon where everybody comes out and parks and waits. Do they show up 45 minutes later, or all the buses are out there waiting? So you actually have to stack them all. So it's a very important consideration.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Oh.
I had one. I don't remember, you know, we've been here so long, I don't remember who said what now, but did you talk about, did you tell us that you have experience in renovating schools, and specifically, you know, the Elm Street School was built in the 30s by the WPA. I think it was based upon a model that was used all over the country. Do you have any experience at looking at this type of school and whether or not to renovate it or not? Do you have experience in dealing with this type of school?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, having done more than 300 school projects and across 40 years of Valley Brensinger, roughly, I would say at least half of our work has been renovation. And it cycles in, year to year, but we have done significant renovations, everything back from your high school to many of the projects we're working on now. All different vintages. We have done historic renovation as well, historic restoration for some select projects. Chris can speak probably a little bit more towards some of those.
Sure. Yeah, projects across so many of the districts, especially here in New Hampshire, have tremendous age of facilities. I can think of even some of the schools we did in Rochester. Salem has quite a range of vintage of schools. Their elementary has portions of that dating back to the 20s. So it is something that we're acutely aware of and how to work. We're not just focused on the new. I mean, that's easy, generally speaking. How do you do complex renovations? We've got projects now with Harvey Construction renovating some of the mills in the Manchester Mill Yard dating back to the 1800s, trying to make those modern spaces. So you've got to know, we have members on staff about what happens to bricks and mortar in the truest sense, how they were made, how the buildings were put together. I know Rich has been aching to say a few comments here. The resource and the asset we have here, Foley Buell, they bring a tremendous amount of insight into old buildings and how to deal with them. Lumber is different, the way steel, masonry, all of that was different. Even concrete is different back then. And so we've worked with Rich in that regard.
Yeah, just to touch on that quickly, yes, the scans are a huge value, and I'm sure we'll be doing that in this case, but it's no substitute for getting into the building and getting your hands dirty and getting above those ceilings, and sometimes some exploratory demolition. And the more of that we do, the more accurate we can be. I think the best example I can think of, though, of renovation recently would be Salem and the work we did there, Lance, recently. But speaking to Elm Street specifically, we've already been in there with the problem that they had with the roof tile over the auditorium, which was a gypsum product, which was pretty common back in the 30s, actually. It's a panelized gypsum product. Once it gets wet, it loses its strength rapidly, and it was in a deteriorated condition. We replaced that. That must have been about 2003, 2004. But in any case, that part of the building has a new roof, has a metal roofing that replaced the gypsum panel that was original to it. So we've already been in the building in that regard.
Well said, Alderman Jenny.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very much for coming in. Tomorrow evening, we have 2 more companies coming in to present, and then we will be calling a separate meeting to make our selection, and we'll be getting in touch. And thank you for coming in. Great presentation, and thank you for all the work that you've done previously, too. Thank you.
We really appreciate the time.